Well, 1 o'clock at least here in Sweden. So I hope you can hear me, and welcome to FIRE 2020, the 6th International Conference on Fires in Vehicles. So my name is Ola Wistrand, and together with the 5 organizing team, I will moderate this webinar for you. And yeah, you will also see my colleague Peter Andersson here as well in front of the camera later on. So, as I mentioned, the 6th conference, so RISE have organized this conference since 2010 and then every second year. And who is then RISE? So probably you know that, some of you. It's short for RISE, Research Institute of Sweden. It's a state-owned research and testing institute in Sweden. We have departments and divisions in several areas, from safety to ICT to life science, material production, and so on. But we are almost 200 people at RISE working with fire technology, fire research, and fire testing. RISE is present all over Sweden and also in Norway through our colleagues at RISE Fire Research Norway, the fire laboratory in Trondheim. And for you who visited the last 5, 2018 in Borås, outside Gothenburg, also knows that this is the location where we have the main fire laboratories facilities in Sweden. And this is where I am right now in Borås. So back to 5. So the intention was to meet in Amsterdam in October this year. Unfortunately, we had to cancel that due to the pandemic, and hope you are all well, by the way. But instead, we meet online here in this webinar, and you will all get the opportunity to listen to all the interesting presentations that was planned for the conference. So it's this afternoon and tomorrow morning, 2.5 days, at least in our time zone, Central European time. The conference, the webinar, will be recorded such that people in other time zones or other people could look at it afterwards, and it will be available at least 2 weeks. And you will all receive a link for that after the conference. And also for those that were too late to register, since we have filled up all the 500 spots that we had available in this Zoom license that we use. So for those, could also look at the recording afterwards. Yeah, so before I introduce our first speaker, just some practical information for you who logged in early. Also saw this in the presentation slides before. I can go forward 1 step here, yes. But yeah, first of all, questions you should put in the Q&A, questions and answer. You have all the Q&A button on your screen. The chat will be disabled for attendees, as well as your microphone and video. So use the Q&A. And this is for questions to the speakers and questions to the organizing committee if you have any technical issues or anything. So use the Q&A. I should also mention that you will not see other questions or questions from others unless we choose to publish an answer to the question, so you don't wonder. But we will do that if it's of relevance for everyone, of course. And then you see on the screen the address here, menti.com. We encourage you to go in there to ask or to answer to the questions. You can use any web browser or your phone or so, and then you also see the code that you will need. You just enter the code and then you receive the questions. So yeah, please note that code, because you can go in at any time during the conference and answer the questions, and we will show some results as well from this poll, maybe later today or at least at the end of the conference tomorrow. Yeah, and then we also have on our webpage for FIRE 2020 papers and abstracts from the speakers available. Could be good to know. So since we didn't have the live event, we will not put together a printed version of proceedings, and it was voluntary to produce a paper, but for those who have, they are now available on the website. And on the website will also be the presentations afterwards for those presenters that approve. So after the conference, you will have them there on the webpage. And yeah, I think that was all what I had planned to say in this introduction. We can look at our program, the first part of the program of today. So our first speaker of today is actually a colleague of mine here at RISE, Franz Evegren, who will talk about fire in vehicles on board ships. So are you with us, Franz?
Yes.
Very good. So then I will then leave the control to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ola. So I hope you can see me and hear me all right. And like Ola said, my name is Franz Evegren. I am the director of the unit organizing this event, actually, RISE Fire Safe Transport. So it's a proud day for me. I will speak about fire in vehicles on board ships, and the agenda for this item, let's see, is presented here. And next to the 5 bullets are some totally unrelated pictures. I'm not going to talk about vehicles carrying ships, but vehicle carrying ships. But is this really a problem with vehicle fires on ships? You might imagine when you think about ships, some kind of cruise ship in the Bahamas. Is this really a problem? You never heard of it, perhaps. And then the villain of vehicles, reefer. It's not the Cruella de Vil vehicle that is the villain of vehicles. I will tell you about it later. And the worst case parking garage, a rower space. It doesn't have anything to do with the drainage of from the rooftop into a garage. And then lash fire. What is all that about? It's not about eyelashes. I'll tell you about that. So, vehicle carrying ships. There's actually a definition of this in the maritime world, and they're called ro-ro ships. It stands for roll on, roll off, and it means that cargoes that you can simply roll on and roll off from and to the ship. And in general, of course, it is cars and trucks or perhaps buses, but it can also be some other cargo that you can roll on and off the ship. And it's actually one of the most common types of ships. The fleet of large vessels in the world is around 53,000, and this is one of the most common types of ships. So there are quite a few in the world, and they're categorized in 3 categories. Ro-ro passenger ships. So a passenger ship in the maritime world is a ship with more than 12 passengers. And if it's less than 12 passengers, I guess in one of these definitions, 12 passengers is also included. I don't remember in which. If it's less than 12, it's a general ro-ro cargo ship. And then there's a special type of general ro-ro cargo ship called vehicle carriers. It's the one at the bottom right. It wouldn't win an architectural design award. It's more or less a shoebox traveling between the continents and transporting cars, etc., between the continents of our world. And half of these ships are approximately ro-pax ships, ro-ro passenger ships, and then approximately a fifth of them are ro-ro cargo ships, and approximately 25 or 28% are vehicle carriers. So are vehicle ships fires, or now you know the term ro-ro ship, so are ro-ro ship fires really a problem? You might say that you haven't heard anything about this in the media, but let me tell you, what you see in media, it's not necessarily a reflection of reality, but rather a reflection of what you want to see. And so what has happened in the past decade, in the past 10 years? I'll just give you some examples of what has happened. So if we go all the way back to 2010, it kind of started with a Commodore Clipper. There was a cable connected to the cargo, which originated the fire in this case. We had the Lisco Gloria, which resulted in 28 persons injured. Big fire. The Mecklenburg-Vorpommern as well in 2010 still. And the fires continued. We had the Pella, and we had the Laut to do, and we had the Kriti 2, and then we had the Norman Atlantic in 2014. And in this fire actually there were unfortunately between 16 and 22 casualties. It's unknown because there were a number of illegal immigrants stowed on board or hiding on board, and they don't know exactly how many. And this is when the authorities really started thinking about this as a problem, and realizing that this was a problem that didn't seem to go away. Continued with the Sorrento in 2015, the fires just kept continuing. Still in 2015, several fires, several significant fires, and the fires have continued. MedStar 2016, the Stena Spirit in 2016 as well. And there are so many fires that you might not have heard of. Stena Britannica, and as of late, Venizelos. And we also have the Buhai Matsu in 2019. And this is kind of where my statistics or pictures end for ro-ro passenger ships. And then we have these types of vehicle carriers that I mentioned. This is actually a vehicle combined with a container carrying capacity. And here we have the Ocean Queen, the Courage. The fire started in a used vehicle, and the Silver Sky. We have the Honor, which we at RISE had the honor to investigate. There was fire starting in the as an electrical fault in the starter motor solenoid, and there was one injury in this fire, and we investigated it for the Swedish Accident Investigation Authority, of course. And the fire was fueled by bursting hydraulic oil pipes, actually. This is the Autobanner taking place in the port of Incheon in South Korea. Really large fire. And then we have the Grimaldi line fires. This was a lot in the media in France. It was also on a so-called Rokon vessel, but the fire was believed to have started in the ro-ro space. It's difficult to say because the ship is now at the bottom of the Bay of the Biscay. So as you understand, ro-ro ship fires are a problem. And based on statistics from the FireSafe 2 study, so over a 15-year period, there have been 37 fires in ro-ro spaces, leading to an average of 2.5 fires per year. So these are only fires starting in the ro-ro spaces, so in the cargo spaces where you store vehicles. So this is a significant problem for sure. And these statistics are only for the ro-ro passenger type ships, and then similar statistics, of course, exist for the other types of ro-ro ships. And so what is the problem on these ships, really? Well, this was investigated also in the FireSafe study. This FireSafe study was including the partners RISE and the classification society Bureau Veritas, as well as the ship operator Stena, who has a large fleet of ro-ro ships. And looking at the statistics, 90% of the fires were initiated in the cargo, in the vehicles, and in the vehicles and in the cargo carried by the vehicles. Maybe not so surprising, since it is a cargo space and most of what is in it is cargo, obviously. But at the same time, the cargo is not moving, the vehicles are not turned on, etc., and there are no collisions. So what is really the problem? Well, we made a division of all the statistics and all the fire origins, and a division of the ship cargo into vehicle and the cargo carried by the vehicles. This applies only for the ro-ro passenger type ships again. And then we also looked at the vehicles and divided it into the cab and what we refer to as the powertrain, which is probably not an accurate definition, but we included there everything except the cabin, so to say. And you might know that even though it's summertime, you might pass some trucks in the darkness that look more or less like Christmas trees. They're lit up with a bunch of lighting fixtures inside the cabin. Many times they have water cookers, etc., installed, or coffee makers inside the cabin, and a lot of retrofits, electrical retrofits, have caused fires in the past. We also have overheated brakes and overheated engines, and that are not cooled sufficiently when they come on board as part of the powertrain. The 24%. These are about 50-50, the cabs and the powertrain causing fires in vehicles. And then if you look at the cargo carried, so more or less the trailers usually, we have one item that really sticks out, and that is the reefers, or what is referred to as reefers. They are refrigerator units, so cooled trailers that are either run by a power connection to the ship power supply or by a diesel generator. And it's actually, yeah, over 75% of the cargo fires are caused by this this type of cargo, the refrigerator units. So, and a third of all the fires are caused by this. In total, 33% of the fires are caused by this. So this is 33% of the top node, which is 100%. So that is a lot, obviously, and this is something that we are investigating now. How can these be avoided? And then we also looked into this because we wanted to determine how large of a percentage of these fires were due to electrical faults, and that figure was approximately 60%. So what is the big deal with a ro-ro space, as it's called? Isn't it just like any type of parking garage or perhaps a tunnel? Well, it is, but the conditions are much worse, I would say. You have a compact loading of cargo, which makes it very difficult to conduct firefighting, and the fire spreads quite easily between the vehicles. Furthermore, not only firefighting is affected, but also the manual detection. There are generally no people in these spaces, and but there are fire patrols carrying out fire rounds, but often they carry them out by walking along a walkway on the side of the ship, and it's very difficult to see across 6 lanes of trucks, for example, when you have a wall of trailers that you walk by. And of course, first response is also very, very difficult, as you can see in the bottom picture from a vehicle carrier. Sorry, I mean, you can't even have the side mirrors pulled out because and it's impossible to even get into the car or to walk by it. And this is not really a true picture because the ceiling, the roof above the cars, is often only centimeters or a few decimeters perhaps above the roof of the car. So it's very difficult to carry out manual firefighting. Another thing that is that there are much cargo, obviously, packed, and all kinds of cargo. You have all the types of dangerous goods on board, and also, of course, reflected in the cargo is the transformation of the vehicle fleet to new energy carriers, what is in the maritime world referred to as alternatively powered vehicles. and no consideration is really taken to the different kinds of cargo here. And in one case, actually, in the first image I showed you of the Commodore Clipper, a big hazard turned out to be potatoes. The potatoes clogged up all the drainage, so they had to turn off the extinguishing system. So all kinds of cargo is mixed in the roller spaces. And there were new regulations for drainage put in place after that fire, actually. And then everyone on board is put at risk. You don't have any safe haven when you're far out at sea. And in case you can't handle the fire on board, you are really putting everyone on board at risk. And then, of course, in some cases, some types of these spaces have openings which make detection very difficult or misplaced or delayed. And also extinguishment can be affected by this. And in the weather type roller spaces, which is not a space, it's just a deck fully exposed to weather and wind, there's no means for detection and no means for extinguishment or fixed extinguishment. So the conditions are, I would say, worst case or representing a worst case parking garage. And there are even more challenges in these roller spaces, and this caused the project, the research project, Lash Fire. There are so many challenges, and we are trying to address these in this project, Lash Fire. It's obviously a forced acronym, meaning Legislative Assessment for Safety Hazards of Fire and Innovations in Rural Ship Environment. But the term lashing is also used in the maritime world, and then illustrated in the image here on the right, representing that you bind down or secure cargo to avoid movement of the cargo in case of rough seas. And this is what we want to do against the fire. We want to strike forcefully against it, which is the most common understanding of the word. And we want to bind down and secure and control the fire. And this EU project, European Innovation Action, is funded by the European Union. And it's running for 4 years from September 2019. And then it's been going on for approximately a year now and will go on for another 3 years. And it's coordinated by RISE, or I'm the coordinator of this big project, including 26 partners, which I will show you momentarily. And the strategic objective of this project is to provide a recognized technical basis for the revision of international IMO regulations. So the IMO stands for it's a UN organization referred to as the International Maritime Organization, and it regulates safety regulations for all. It's more or less a parliament, including all the nations in the world. So it's not only the European Union or a part of the world, but all the nations in the world are represented here. And we want to revise regulations from the IMO to greatly enhance fire prevention and ensure independent management of fires in roller ships in current and future challenges. And these are the 20 challenges that we are addressing. And I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm actually only going to show you one. But I can also mention that in action, we refer to these as actions, where we address specific challenges. One of these challenges is to achieve effective and efficient manual firefighting. And in this action, we are particularly addressing alternatively powered vehicles. And this is also addressed in action 8B, where we're trying to define guidelines and solutions for electrical connections on board, including, of course, electrical vehicles and also these type of refrigerator units and how this should be done in a safe manner. But the one I want to talk a little bit more about today is the automatic screening and management of cargo fire hazards here, 8A in the ignition prevention work package. And in this action is based on what I mentioned earlier here, that 90% of all the RoPax fires originate in the cargo. And the cargo can be everything from brand new to poorly maintained or rebuilt even, or unsafe vehicles or cargo. But the fire hazards are not screened in any way. So the cargo is loaded, except with some consideration to different types of dangerous goods. There's no really consideration to how to load the spaces in a smart way or in a safe way. We consideration to both dangerous goods, common fire hazards, or alternatively powered vehicles. So the goal here is to develop and demonstrate the technical solution for automatic screening of the cargo, to identify fire hazards, and to develop, utilize, and experimentally validate a digital logistics management tool featuring risk-based load planning. So more or less what we want to do is, first, we have the basis on all the fires that have occurred and common vehicle fires. And what means do we have to identify these fires? For example, we are investigating infrared cameras or LiDAR or fiber optic sensors. And I should give some credit here to the company SICK, who is a partner of the project, who are also having this vehicle hotspot detection system installed before vehicles go into tunnels, and how this can be applied for ships instead. And what tools do we have to identify? Can we fire hazards? Can we use drones in some way, or a rover? Should we do it in the harbor before the cargo is loaded, or should we do it on board? And what can we do with this information? Can we affect the loading somehow, or can we affect management routines? Should we make sure that some certain hazards are attended to by the fire patrols during the long voyage of the ship, for example? I'm not going to go into further detail all the steps that we are carrying out in this action, but it's taking place now and will go on for approximately 30 months. So in this project, in all of these 20 challenges that we are addressing in Lashfire, we will try to quantify, first find solution and quantify how these solutions can affect the risk on board. How much can the risk be reduced by this implementation of an automatic screening tool and affecting how you load and manage the fire hazards on board, for example? And what is the cost of this solution? So what is the risk reduction and what is the cost? And this is lifted into a cost effectiveness assessment, where we have criteria defined by the International Maritime Organization, there are guidelines for it at least. And then this is the starting point for developing new proposals for regulations or for amendments, and also for guidelines in how should the regulations be applied. And this is really how we are achieving the goal in the project, or the strategical objective, to provide a recognized technical basis for the revision of international IMO regulations, greatly enhance fire prevention and ensure independent management of fires in current and future fire safety challenges. And the partners in this project, it's a really nice combination of partners, I would say, consisting of both the universities, we have the research institutes, and then we have the system manufacturers. We have a lot of organizations, for example, Sea Europe, which is a shipyard and a ship system manufacturing representative for that industry, and Interfer representing ship operators, and we have shipyard representatives in the group. So it's a really good mix. And I also have to point out once again that this has received funding from the European Union. And if you're more interested in this project, you can visit the Lashfire website. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franz. And we have at least one question here on the Q&A. So I read it for you. On car carriers, is there any estimate by survey or otherwise of unreported fires, meaning fires that have not required formal report and included in statistics? And there is also a comment that land-based property fire statistics is in generally estimated to represent only 20% of all occurring fires.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a very good question, I would say. And no, we don't have any quantitative assessment of this. But what we are trying to do, so we have 3 ship operator representatives. It's Stena, it's DFDS, and Wallenius Marine. And Wallenius Marine represents this vehicle carrier. So in addition to these, we have maritime operators advisory group consisting of approximately 10 operators. And from these operators, we have received a lot of near miss data and small incident data or small accident data, because what we have mostly in the statistics that I showed you are the really big fires for sure. And we know that there's a big difference between reality and what is represented in this data. These are really significant fires. So I don't have any quantitative measure. We know that it is a problem and we're trying to address it in this way. And we have collected, I think it was, if it was 100 and something or even 200 something incidents from this maritime advisory group. Anonymous data, which is important in this case, but it is a very good contribution to our data that we have of the significant fire, so to say.
Yeah, okay, and yeah, I have a question here at least. So you mentioned that rural spaces is kind of worst case parking garage. So do you think this communication is good? I mean, spread of information between the maritime industry and how to handle the rural spaces and the land-based industry?
Yeah, that's also a good question and something that we have discussed, not least with consideration to refrigerator units. This is something that we feel we can't affect from the maritime perspective. It's really the trucking companies or the manufacturers of these refrigerator units placed on the trailers that we need to address. I don't think there is a really good connection between the two industries, I would say, the maritime and the vehicle industry. There's definitely more that could be done there. We at RISE, of course, we try to take the knowledge from what we do in underground developments of parking garages and investigations there into the maritime world, but I wouldn't say there's a lot more that can be done here, I would say.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And yeah, one last question maybe. So you mentioned that these rural fires is a large problem, but what other great fire risks are there on board ships?
Yeah, I would say that the largest fire, if I remember correctly, is of course engine room and the machinery space fires. A lot of the fires occur in the machinery spaces on the ships. So that I think is the greatest fire risk in general. But then also, as you probably know, the cruise ship industry, the cruise ships are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and part of this fire risk is also that you have so many people on board that you put at risk. And if you have 5, 6, 7, 8,000 people on board, really nothing is allowed to happen because you're putting so many people at risk.
Okay, so now there is some questions coming in. So we take another one. So if reefers are the biggest problem, so is the issue on the reefer or is it rising at the connection or something else?
So as far as I understand, it's both. Some of these cases, the reefers have been connected to the electrical power supply of the ship. Many of the fires have been caused by electrical faults. But also in some cases, it has been the diesel generators. The belt has what do you say? Has become too warm and caused a fire in itself. So we're trying to address it. We don't know exactly what is the biggest problem. Some claim that it's probably the hertz, the frequency, that it's 50 hertz in land and 60 hertz on the electrical systems on board, causing them to overheat. But I don't think that's the full truth either. So I'm not sure, I would say, what is really the biggest problem here. But we have seen a lot of cases of these reefer units that are not really ship shape, as we call it. They're not maintained well, and they're perhaps not constructed in a safe way either.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Franz. And we will go over to our second speaker now, Markus Egelhaaf from DEKRA, Germany. We'll talk about crash rescue and extinguishing tests with electrical vehicles. Are you there, Markus?
I'm here. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect.
So So I will just give you the control. And then the floor is yours.
Okay. So it's working now. Okay, hello from my side. I'm happy to be allowed to present here about a study we conducted during the past several years. I'll just give a quick introduction into the whole project, which resulted in the final fire and extinguishing tests, and conclude with a kind of paper developed by several organizations here in Germany, including DEKRA, to prepare a paper for firefighters in how to handle incident scenes involving electric vehicles. My name is Markus Egelhaaf. I studied safety engineering with a main focus in fire and explosion protection at the University of Wuppertal. And additionally, I'm an accident analyst. I'm working for DEKRA Accident Research since 2001. And in private life, I'm a volunteer firefighter. So in my job, I'm combining both sides, and I try to be a partner between the automotive industry and their language and the fire department's language to combine their wishes and needs and to work for a better understanding from each side. About the project, we started that in 2012. It was a cooperation together with the Department of Anesthesiology of the University of Göttingen. Tim Heine is here the main name. Many of you may have heard this name. And the project was also supported by Weewer Hydraulic, Weewer Rescue with equipment for our testing. The main cause for the project was that the challenges on the road for firefighters become a lot harder. The cars became a lot more harder. The structures were better and better to protect the occupants in the case of an accident, not at least since Euro NCAP built new standards, and the fire brigade had to challenge all those new items, those structures. The cars were equipped with airbags, and all that was leading to many questions. And can we keep on working on wrecked vehicles? And yeah, these are pictures of the situations firefighters are seeing very often. And looking at the training situation, we take cars found in junkyard and the vehicles are not deformed. So the main task at an accident scene to re-deform the deformations can't be trained with such vehicles at all. So the training world is completely different to the world of an accident site. And we wanted to find solutions for firefighters. We wanted to find out what can be improved here. There are various educational books, standards from all over the world, and how to handle different kind of cars, starting with vehicle rescue in general, up to vehicle firefighting or vehicle rescue with electric vehicles. But most of these standards and books and educating materials are based on experiences. Only a few aspects have been scientifically observed and brought to paper. So it's experiences from all over the world with different vehicle standards, and usually those standards are running behind the development of vehicle development. And another topic is that there is a large number of different extrication methods. Each fire department says, oh, this is a method we use and this is the best one. So there are many unclear aspects in which method is the best for which situation. And we wanted to provide information here by scientifically testing. And what we did in the beginning of our project was to purchase used cars in an after Euro NCAP period. It was a Ford Focus. First year of production was 1999 to 2005, with a frontal crash test 85 kilometers per hour and 60% overlap, and we did that with about 30 vehicles. So this is a crash test far beyond standard. And we had a trapped dummy inside, which was rescued with different methods to analyze the doing. So we had up-to-date rescue equipment, as it is on most German fire engines. We tested new methods. This is a method, for example, with chain rescue, as it is used in the Scandinavian area, and many fire departments in Germany say, oh, this is a very good method. We need to use that for future extrication work. Or also the classic German method was removing the whole roof to get the occupant freed. And what we could see is that the firefighter is the most influencing part in that rescue work. How is he handling the tool? How is the group leader saying what they have to do? So all methods work well, and the times were acceptable for all methods. And all methods led to an extrication of the occupants, and the occupants could be freed. So the follow-up question was, will all this also work on electric cars? And how have firefighters, or what should firefighters do if they come to an accident scene with the involvement of an electric car? And here the fire became a much more aspect, because everybody told, oh, electric cars, a large impact against the battery, and the battery will burst into flames immediately. And it is absolutely impossible to extinguish battery fires. So we were confronted with those questions very often, and so we decided to do testing with electric cars, not only crash recovery, but also firefighting and learning more about the burning behavior of such cars and the batteries. A quick look to the statistics here in Germany. The car stock on January 1st, 2020 was dominated by the gasoline-driven cars, followed by the diesel cars, and other fuels at just a percentage of 2.4. Looking at those 2.4%, the liquefied petroleum gas was still the majority, followed directly by the hybrid-driven cars. Electric cars were still on a very small level within that small group. Combining the cars with an electric drivetrain, the hybrid cars and the electric cars, they had a share of just 1.4%. That's very, very little. But looking at the 2019 figures, sorry, there it was just 0.9%. So the rate or the number of those vehicles is increasing enormously. And this is shown on that chart here. So within the next couple of years, the electric cars, on the hybrid electric cars, will have an important share on the car stock here on German roads, and this is comparable to other nations, of course, too. So the number of fire calls or incident calls for fire brigades to accident scenes involving electric cars, battery electric or hybrid electric cars, will also increase. So what we did in the first step was to do a crash test with two different electric cars. The first one was a Nissan Leaf, the second one a Renault Zoe. We crash tested both with a speed of 60 kilometers per hour in a 90-degree angle against a rigid pole. This is comparable to a tree impact. And we already had a large experience in such testing with conventionally driven cars. So we used that speed to have comparable results and to be able to say, will the battery really burst into flames what will happen with the electric system of the vehicle. And the results were impressive. We have not had a fire. The high voltage system was shut down automatically within the first seconds after the impact. And the deformation patterns were very good, comparable to those of the conventional driven cars. So we could state no additional risk, maybe other risks, but the fire risks could be comparable, which is also a result of our research with real life accidents. So we wouldn't say just because after 2 crash tests we had no fire, though the cars will not burn. We would rather say it is comparable to the conventional driven cars. If you have such impacts, you can have a fire, but it's no must. We then followed up and said, we will increase the speed and we will also test for frontal impact. So we purchased 2 more Nissan Leaf, and yeah, I have quick movies. So this is a frontal impact with a speed of 84 kilometers per hour against the tragic pole. The intrusion of the pole went up to the upper edge of the windscreen. This is pretty much comparable to another crash test we did with a conventional driven car. The intrusion depth was similar. In that case, the high voltage system was shut down immediately, and the 12-volt battery was also destroyed by that impact. So the 12-volt system was also destroyed and off. Sorry, that was too fast. This is a video of a side impact. Yeah, no video of the side impact. Yeah, I can start. The depth of the impact was also comparable to similar internal combustion engine vehicles. The chance to survive such a crash or impact is, of course, very limited. To say there is no chance to survive such a crash. But also here, no fire, and the high voltage system automatically shut off immediately during the crash. As with the 60 kilometers per hour crashed side impacts, the 12-volt system stayed alive. The infotainment system worked, so we could switch on the radio after that crash test. That means that the lights would still have worked, that an e-call, if the vehicle would have been equipped with an e-call, would have worked. So the main safety features of the vehicle still stayed alive, even though the high voltage system was shut down. No fire during that crash test. And we can see that the intrusion was very, very deep into the vehicle. That's an underground picture taken of the frontal impact vehicle. And that's what the Leaf looked like after the side impact. What you can see clearly here is that the battery pack, which is located here, I'll show it with my mouse, is deformed heavily, and that also the modules inside the battery pack have received the damage, but there was no post-collision vehicle fire. We did several testing with hydraulic rescue equipment to check, can we use it on that vehicle in a similar way as we did in internal combustion engines. And the methods were the same. We never had a point that we had to contact the high voltage components. So that kind of work was absolutely similar. Nothing new to learn. We did also several tests with different methods like removing the door, removing the roof, opening the trunk area. But we also wanted to see what will happen if a car bursts into flames. How can such a fire be extinguished? And from further research, we know that we can cool down the battery pack from outside. We can use a lot of water, pour it on the battery pack to cool down, to stop the reaction inside the battery housing and get the fire under control in that way. Recently, a manufacturer here in Germany developed an extinguishing lens. This is nailed into the battery pack from the firefighters. And it has a big advantage. The water is directly poured into the battery housing. So the fire cannot only be stopped by cooling it down, but really by extinguishing the fire. The Renault vehicles we used had the fireman access. This is an opening inside the battery housing where the firefighters can directly pour water inside the battery housing, but Renault is the only manufacturer providing such a system. The other manufacturers still remain to say cool down the battery housing, but with better and better batteries being used, the thermal insulation inside the battery housings is growing. So cooling down the battery cells themselves from outside becomes more and more difficult. And that's a new challenge for the fire services. So we wanted to test that lens and check what will happen if this is used on the vehicles. We did a test here. Of course, you only use that lens on burning batteries and never for prevention. We had no burning battery, so we ignited the battery by using that lens and having a short circuit. Okay, the video is not starting now. On the test, it worked. Oh no, we got it.
Gas geben, ja. Und mal die Lausche. Nur die Spreizer. Das ist nur ein Spreizer. Das kann jeder. Hier ist das Band.
Ja, er kommt.
We did some electrical testing to ensure that there is no currently on the lens. What we also learned was, as soon as we applied water to the lens, the battery fire was extinguished very fast and we had no reignition. That's what it looked like after testing. We did the test with several vehicles, although on vehicles that still had a roof, so although the handling was possible here. And in a final test, we had an opened battery to know exactly where the modules are, what it is looking inside. The battery was on fire before using the lens, and this is an extinguishing effect. The lens was fed with 50 liters of F500 water combination, so no pure water in that case, but pure water also worked. And I hope I'll find my start button.
Männer, steht doch, wo ihr reingeschlagen habt und ihr seid mitten bin. Das ist doch nicht das erste Mal.
cells being damaged, resulting in fire. Fire patterns are easy to know from running lithium-ion batteries. But what we could also see in the test was that they had very fast cool down, and we finally extinguishing fire. And although in that case after fire one extinguished, we had no ignition. And although the burning cells away from the land were extinguished very quickly and fast, even though it was the opening of the battery housing, the possibility still be flood the complete housing and have everything underwater for a couple of minutes. So the results of that project were combined with the experience of several firefighters, of people working for the state fire schools here in Germany, with people from Austrian fire brigades and many other experts from all fields, including the vehicle manufacturers. And that interdisciplinary working group developed a guideline for firefighters here in Germany that was published through the German social accident insurance. That's the insurance responsible for the volunteer firefighters, and giving a guideline in how to act on scenes with electric vehicles and how to extinguish such fires. The conclusions are there was no fire in all of our tests. The battery shut-off worked as necessary for European certification, but also on used car that was still working. The standard rescue methods could be applied on crashed vehicles, so the fire departments do not have to train new tactics in freeing people. And the method using the lance was very promising, but we found some risky things or aspects for the firefighters. So also in the sheet published by the DTUV, we decided to say in the current version, the lance should not be used by public fire brigades. Work fire brigades, of course, can still use it without any problem because they know what they do and they know the battery they have in front of them. And the paper we developed is available free of charge on the sites of the German accident insurance. And that's a quick overview about the project, about what we did. And
yeah, thank you, Markus. So yeah,
very good
presentation. And we are just a couple of minutes now before the break, but we have several questions here on the state of charge of the batteries in the vehicle tests.
The state of charge was 100% according to the vehicle charging system. So the vehicles were charged before the crash test until they set SOC of 100.
Okay, and there's a question here. So how much of the battery do you have access with this lance, or have you an estimation of that? So could you access all the complete battery with the lance, or what do you think about that?
The battery housing, we can access the battery housing and flood the battery housing. So everything was in the battery compartment. Maybe if a car has two different batteries and you use the lens on one of the battery housings, you can flood that, but the water will not flow into the other battery housing. But you simply need one point where you can pierce the battery housing and then flood it with water, and the water will flow to all parts of that battery box.
Yeah, so one last question then. So there was a question, if was it the lance that caused the thermal runaway when you put it into the battery in the first movie there, I think it was.
In the first movie, yes, we pierced the battery housing and then in follow-up pierced one or more of the battery cells. And by piercing the battery cells, it's like a nail penetration test. So we started an ignition of that single cell or more of the cells, which was in follow-up running to the next battery zone. We had a thermal runaway started by piercing in the lens.
Yeah, thank you very much, Markus. And the time is up for you. There was some more questions, but now, as you see in the program, we have a short break. Go getting some coffee or go to the bathroom or something, and we will meet again in 10 minutes for the next presentation.
Answer the questions in the question and answer section.
Yeah, good.
Howard. I just wanted to see if it's possible to do a sound check, if you're there.
Hello.
Yeah, hello. Well, I was.
This is Ricardo Weewer.
Yeah. Well, I was asking for Howard. So.
Okay.
Okay. So well, we see.
Hei Petra, kan du høre meg? Jeg hører ikke deg, men jeg så at du nikket. Ja.
Ja, casting av igen. Good afternoon, everybody. So it's 2:10 here in Sweden, and my name is Petra Andersson. I'm the chair of the scientific committee of FIVE 2020, and it's a real pleasure to have such a great number of interesting presentations to look forward to here during these today and tomorrow. And we are very lucky that we could do this despite these difficult situations. So the next speaker will be Ricardo, who will talk about the Dutch procedure for response to electrical vehicle accidents and fires by the fire service. So I should start here. And give the control to you, Ricardo. So please go ahead, Ricardo. The floor is yours. And
So hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, start my video. Yes, okay. So because the host should have opened my video. So I'm happy to see you all. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Ricardo Weewer. I'm from the Fire Service Academy in the Netherlands. I'm the professor of fire service science. And on this topic, I worked closely together with my colleague, Nils Rosmuller, who is a professor of energy transition, and our dean, Jaap Molenaar. But I will do the presentation. And I want to introduce to you the Dutch procedure, how to deal with incidents with electrical cars. And sometimes I think like, okay, so everybody should know this already, but considering all the questions that we get also from other countries who are also dealing with the same problem, what can we do? There are some safety issues in it, and how should we, for example, extinguish fires with electrical cars? Now, we have seen the presentation of Markus from DEKRA right away. And so I think it is still interesting. So let me start in the beginning where our journey started, because this is an issue that is not from now, but it already. Oh, can I get back? Also, yeah. It's so fast. So this is 2016. So we go 4 years back, and what we saw was our first incident involving a Tesla, and it was a high impact collision with a tree. The person trapped was already died. He already died, and when my colleagues came at the scene, they saw that the car caught fire, and pieces of the battery were lying everywhere, also on fire. And as a matter of fact, they didn't know what to do. So they called Tesla. Tesla came at the scene, and even the guys from Tesla were not sure whether it was, for example, safe to touch the car. And they said, like, okay, it should be okay, but please put the automatic defibrillator ready, because if it goes wrong, then at least we can help. So this was not very confiding. And we thought, like, okay, so luckily the person was already, he already died, so we could do it somewhere else. But still, of course, dealing with the fire was really difficult. As a matter of fact, at that same time, we already published a document dealing with this kind of problems. It is called Fire Service Activities when modern vehicles are involved. But like always, you know, having a document is not enough. This knowledge was not yet disseminated to the fire services. And of course, immediately after this incident, media started asking questions like, why didn't the fire service know what to do, etc. So everybody started getting knowledge everywhere. This is the moment that my colleague Nils and me, we decided that we should start a community of practice battery packs. And in this community of practice, everybody that has any knowledge is allowed to participate. So we have participants from fire services, from towing companies, demolition companies, knowledge centers, charging facilities companies, and battery recycling company. So all this knowledge together helped us to create a procedure for the fire service. And of course, there were questions like, in the beginning, a lot of discussions about what kind of extinguishing agent would help. At the end, we decided that only a lot of water would help, and probably also putting the car into a basin of water would be the best way to do that. But we had still some remaining questions. Suppose there is not a fire and the person is trapped and the battery is involved and the battery is severely damaged, like we saw in the pictures from Markus Egelhaaf from DEKRA. Would it be possible that firefighters or maybe persons trapped could be electrocuted? Everybody says, and especially the manufacturers of the cars, they tell us, no, this probability is very low. But what is very low? And firefighters want to know, can we work securely? Can we work safely on this car? So we started thinking maybe you should try to measure. Well, together with experts from the fire service and DNV GL, we solved this problem, and we draw the conclusion that this probability is indeed very, very, very low. So very low because you need to touch the plus and the minus pole with bare hands. And generally our firefighter protective clothing will protect us enough from this kind of situations if we would be able to touch both poles. And that is already, you know, you need to do very strange things to get that done. So that question was solved. We are still thinking about the best way to control the fires. Of course, to control the fire, a lot of water is enough, but we doubt whether it is possible to cool the battery enough. for example, from the bottom. So we think that, well, of course, it is very promising if you can use that lens or a cobra cutter, but we don't believe that this can be safely done at the moment by firefighters. So our strategy would be to urge the manufacturers of batteries to provide special entrances where we can put the water in. So that would be the strategy that we follow, although we also see that nobody is probably following this advice. So it means that we will keep on putting cars into basins of water, I'm afraid. So what we've done is, of course, you can see the pictures. These are the action perspectives. I don't know what is the right English words, but these are the procedures that firefighters can follow. And if you look at this scheme, wait a minute, we go back. It's too fast. This is the scheme, and you can see that there is 3 important criteria. First, is there a fire or not? Second is the battery involved? And third is there a person trapped? Of course, you can conclude that when there is only a fire, it is easier than when there is a battery also involved, and when there is a person involved, it is becoming even more difficult. So, of course, we have situations where there is already a fire or where the battery is damaged. Well, we have seen that the probability of a battery getting fire is very low, very small, but still we see a lot of battery fires. So I will not go into much detail because we made a very nice movie, and so I would like to end this presentation by showing the movie because it gives you some idea of what we encountered in 2016, and it also explains the procedure right now. And using this movie, we try to reach the firefighters in the field because, you know, only a procedure on the internet is not enough to help our firefighters. So in the next slide, we will start the movie, and that explains everything to you.
De vroege morgen van woensdag 7 september werd ik tegen 6 uur gealarmeerd voor een eenzijdig ongeval met een voertuig. Is het niet meer dan dat, een slachtoffer bevrijden en dan mee inpakken en weer terug. En nu krijg je mee dat het een Tesla was. En ik van ja, ik ben normaal gewend dat we te maken hebben met een brandstofvoertuig, maar we hadden nu te maken met hele batterijpakketten. En achteraf hoor ik dat er wel 7000 batterijen in zijn auto zitten. En eerlijk gezegd weet ik niet precies wat ik daarmee aan moet als ze op de weg liggen. Toen wij de brand uit hadden, waarmee we in eerste instantie geconfronteerd werden, toen dacht ik van nou, mooi, stabiel. En ik had het nog niet zo benoemd. En toen ontstond er opeens weer brand in de auto. En dat is ongeveer een uur nadat het incident was begonnen, brak opeens weer brand uit in die auto. Nou, toen denk ik van nou is het klaar. Ik zeg, nu doen we echt een stapje terug en nu laten de experts komen. En toen heb ik Tesla gebeld. En toen in eerste instantie kwamen er 2 heren en die kwamen in beeld brengen wat nou echt het probleem was. Toen werd er volgens foto's gemaakt, werd er weer gebeld. En toen kwamen er specialisten van Tesla die alles weten over de batterijpakketten in het voertuig. De eerste vraag die ik ze gesteld heb van mannen, kunnen jullie mij vertellen of wij veilig het voertuig kunnen benaderen? Want wij willen nog graag het slachtoffer uit het voertuig halen. Toen hebben zij dat allemaal bekeken en toen hebben zij op een gegeven moment tegen ons gezegd van jullie kunnen het voertuig benaderen, maar draag wel beschermende handschoenen, raak het voertuig zo weinig mogelijk aan en zorg ook dat je een AED te plaatsen hebt voor het geval het toch fout gaat. Ik denk achteraf dat ik een goede beslissing heb genomen door gewoon een stapje terug te doen en mensen erbij te houden die er verstand van hebben. Blijkbaar is er wel een reëel risico waar we mee te maken hebben en heb ik dat niet onderschat. Want we hebben te maken met de thermal runaway, een term die ik nu geleerd heb. Dat is het gevaar dat een batterijpakket gewoon spontaan in brand kan vliegen. We hebben te maken met het giftige gas wat vrijkomt. En we hebben te maken met het risico op elektrocutie. En er zijn 3 risico's waar ik nog niet bekend mee was. We weten wat benzine doet, we weten wat diesel doet, we weten wat we met gas moeten doen. Maar wat we moeten doen met de batterijen, die kan je niet zo even aan en uitzetten. Of je kan niet eventjes iets overheen leggen waardoor het, zeg maar, het gevaar weg is. Dus het is nu echt tijd om te gaan bedenken van wat gaan we doen bij dit soort voertuigen waar nog slachtoffers in zitten die gered moeten worden.
Brandweer Nederland heeft niet stilgezeten. Er is nauw contact met de branche en de ontwikkelingen worden in een speciale landelijke werkgroep gevolgd. De ontwikkelingen volgen elkaar zo snel op dat we samen moeten optrekken. We verrichten zelf onderzoek, maar we stimuleren ook de branche om na te denken over de veiligheid van hulpverleners. We starten bij een incident met een voertuig, uiteraard met de identificatie van het voertuig. Gaat het om een elektrisch aangedreven voertuig, dan geeft dit specifieke risico-informatie over het chassis, over de plaatsing van de accu's en over de veiligheidsvoorzieningen en de bekabeling. Als het voertuig in brand staat, benader hem dan onder een hoek van 45 graden en verzamel extra informatie. Kijk naar de schade aan het chassis, de airbags en de eventuele slachtoffers en natuurlijk de omgeving. Er zijn 4 hulpmiddelen om de stabiliteit van het accupakket te beoordelen. Beoordeel of het accupakket instabiel is of in brand staat. Bij geen instabiele of brandende accu, dan is het een gewone autobrand. Zodra er een volledig beeld van de situatie is, moet het voertuig natuurlijk gestabiliseerd worden, zoals dat ook gebeurt bij andere typen voertuigen. Bij een incident met een elektrisch voertuig zijn er 2 scenario's denkbaar. 1 waarbij de accu's beschadigd zijn en 1 waarbij er brand is. Zorg bij een beschadiging van het battery pack voor directe koeling met een lage drukstraal om ontbranding te voorkomen. Bij twijfel aan het type accu, behandel het voertuig dan alsof het een lithium-ion battery pack heeft. En blijf voortdurend het vrijkomen van brandbare en toxische gassen monitoren. Een brand in een voertuig met een lithium-ion accu of twijfel over het type accu moet anders geblust worden dan bij een normale inzet. Benader het voertuig onder een hoek van 45 graden met 2 lage drukstralen en houd 1 worplengte aan als blusafstand. 1 lage druk voor de battery pack en 1 lage druk voor het voertuig. Blus een lithium-ion brand met overmatig veel water. Indien mogelijk, zet dan het accupakket onder water. En het is dan niet nodig om het hele voertuig onder water te zetten. Maar doe dat totdat er geen gasbelletjes meer vrijkomen. Een andere mogelijkheid is om het voertuig gewoon gecontroleerd te laten uitbranden, wanneer het voertuig op een locatie staat waar het niet direct kwaad kan voor de omgeving. Voor allebei de scenario's is het belangrijk om uit de gaswolken te blijven. Gebruik altijd je persoonlijke beschermingsmiddelen en allemeer de adviseur gevaarlijke stoffen. Bij zowel een beschadiging als bij brand is het belangrijk om de temperatuur van de battery pack langdurig te monitoren, omdat bij temperaturen boven de 60 graden een thermal runaway nog altijd mogelijk is. Als er sprake is van beknelde passagiers is het natuurlijk van belang deze zo snel mogelijk uit het voertuig te verwijderen. En dit kan tijdens of na het blussen. De omstandigheden bepalen dan wat de mogelijkheden zijn. Bij een instabiele battery pack, dat is bijvoorbeeld als hij rookt en sist, moeten de beknelde passagiers worden voorzien van adembescherming. Als dat niet lukt, ga dan zo snel mogelijk ventileren. Let er bij het gebruik van spreiders en scharen op dat je de battery pack niet beschadigt. Als de battery pack beschadigd is en er zit iemand bekneld, brand of geen brand, is het erg belangrijk om te bepalen of je droog kunt werken. Met droge persoonlijke beschermingsmiddelen werken en een droge ondergrond is voor zover bekend de meest veilige manier. En daarnaast moet je natuurlijk de metalen delen zoveel mogelijk afdekken. Bij nat weer of natte kleding wordt aangeraden om eerst een deskundige te laten komen. Als dit echt niet mogelijk is, zorg dan in ieder geval voor dat de metalen delen worden afgedekt met isolerende materialen. En hierbij blijft natuurlijk gelden, eigen veiligheid eerst. Ja, zodra het voertuig geen direct gevaar meer vormt voor de omgeving, moet het worden overgedragen aan een gespecialiseerde berger. De battery pack die kan namelijk na bestrijding nog steeds ontbranden door instabiliteit. Adviseer dan ook om het voertuig naar een veilige plek te brengen op minimaal 15 meter afstand van de andere objecten.
De vroege morgen van woensdag 7 september.
Let me see. So I think that this was all. Thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions, I would be glad to answer them in the Q&A.
Thank you, Ricardo. You have really taken this to the, ultimate end, I believe, in making a video for this. So we have received some questions in the Q&A, and the first one is, do you require thermal cameras for firefighting persons to have on place to monitor the battery temperature after the accident?
Well, in the Netherlands, every fire engine does have these thermal imaging cameras. So that's why we advise them to use them. Although it will maybe not always be possible to measure the real temperature with these cameras, because you have to know what you do, but you can at least see if something is getting warmer in time, because that is the most important thing. You have to, not the temperature, but the increase in temperature is really very important.
Yes, thank you. And the next one here is, how do you identify if there is an onboard lithium-ion battery? Also considering lithium starter batteries or within trucks or buses, what is still required for you?
Yes, at least you can recognize from the outside of a vehicle whether it is an electrical or hybrid. You know, if there is no exhaust, then you know it is an electrical car. But in the Netherlands, we have a crash recovery system. And nowadays, there is also a new one, which the name I forgot, but it is from the ISO organization, who have a new online system, onboard system, where you can type the characteristics of the car, and then you will know whether it is electric or not and what kind of a battery is inside. So sometimes it is of course not known, but then we assume that it is lithium-ion. If we are sure that it is, for example, not lithium-ion but another type of battery, then of course we can deal with the car fire or with the incident like any car. Is that the answer to the question?
Yeah, I think partly, but what happens if it's a crashed car? Sometimes it can be difficult to see what kind of car it is.
Yeah, so if you cannot see the license plate, because in that crash recovery system or in that other system, which name I forgot, so you can type in the license plate and then you will find out what kind of car is it. But indeed, if you cannot see the license plate and also there is no other characteristics, then it is very difficult. But of course, then you have to, for example, firefighter will learn that they have to deal with the incident like it is a worst case.
Okay. And then we have one more here, popular subject is, after you have submerged a vehicle battery, how you process the water after the battery has been cooled?
Yes, that is still a question, because we don't really know. We didn't find any measurements of how much pollution will be in the water. The latest research is from, I think, from Switzerland, and they measured the pollution of the water after extinguishment of a battery fire in a tunnel. And according to their measurements, there is a lot of heavy metals inside the water. So until now, we didn't have so many car fires. So I wouldn't know what they did with the water from the container, to be honest. But I would not advise to just put it into the normal sewer system.
And then we have one more here. Why proceed in a 35-degree angle towards the vehicle?
Well, yes, I didn't tell you that, but of course there is an international working group from CTIF, and they advise to approach every modern car from 45 degrees, because the first thing you can have is that the car starts driving automatically. I believe that nowadays they are working on systems that they cannot drive anymore, but until now we have to take into account that all the cars can just start driving. So it is not safe to approach it directly from the front, and from the rear. For example, the gas tanks or other hydraulic mechanisms might, during a fire, might explode or fly away. So that's why they say approach it from 45 degrees. That is the most safe angle, if possible. Because if it is not possible, please don't stay in the danger zone too long. That is the advice. And use two hose lines, one for the energy source and one from the compartment, because you have to of course to fight the fire and in the same time also cool. And that doesn't only go for electrical cars with lithium-ion batteries, but also for example CNG cars and maybe in the future the hydrogen tanks, which need cooling immediately. Because if they start, of course, when they start exhausting, then you cannot see the flame. So they say like extinguish the fire and immediately also start cooling the energy source.
Okay.
And we just followed their advice.
And so concerning the video here that you showed, I mean, I understand that it has been available in Dutch for some time. And so do you keep record of how many times the videos had been viewed? And have you received any feedback on it?
No. I don't know how many times. Oh, by the way, it is also available in English now, because so we are going to put that online also, so everybody can watch it now. And I think it is still in development also. So for example, the question like, is it really true that you can cool the battery pack by putting water on the bottom of the car? Well, we are not sure. As a matter of fact, we think it is not possible because, you know, the plate will be very thick. There might be isolation inside, so it will at least be very slowly. Putting water on the top may help better, and putting water inside the exhaust valves or exhaust holes would be best if you can reach it, of course. So we are still trying to find out what is the best. But until now, this is the best of knowledge that is everybody agreeing on, because even internationally, nobody has a better idea about that. So it is. We are still, of course, collecting all the recommendations. For example, like, can you really use that thermal imaging camera? Of course, that is our advice. But now from practice, we get already some commands that maybe it is very difficult to measure temperatures using that. So it still is very important that firefighters, when they approach an incident with an electrical car, they keep every sense open. You have to listen. Do you hear something? Do you see something? Do you smell something? You know, everything is important, and these are only given the possibilities we have at the moment, we can use this. But I'm not sure whether this will be still like this in a year.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think now it's time to move on to the next speaker. So thank you, Ricardo. And there are some questions in the Q&A that feel free to answer them. And I will take back the control here, and I will give it to, well, I should first do like this. So the next speaker will be Ragnhild Mikkelsen, and she will be talking about a large fire that happened last year in Norway. Investigation of massive fire in a multi-storey car park in Norway. Fire spread and contribution from electrical fires is the name of a talk, and I will hand over the word and screen. Oh, sorry, I should do this first. I think you have if you click Ragnar, you will get the control. So we do not hear you right now.
Yeah, I'm not speaking.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you, Petra. So I will be presenting the large fire at Stavanger Airport Sola in a multi-storey car park there that happened on January 2020. And together with my colleagues here at Rise Fire Research in Norway, we have made this investigation. And as mentioned before today, RISE is in Sweden, but also here in Norway. We are a Norwegian Fire Resource Center located in Trondheim, and we've been here since 1934. We are an accredited test lab and an inspection body, and we're owned by RISE and by SINTEF. And we're also the proud center director of FRIC, Fire Research and Innovation Center, which is currently sponsoring this presentation. So today I will present the fire at Stavanger Airport. As you can see, my location now is in Trondheim, the blue dot, and Stavanger is located at the southwest area of Norway. I will give you an introduction to the incident and mitigation efforts, talk about fire protection measures, environmental impact, and finally the fire safety design and building regulations. The Sola Airport is an international airport, has around 4 million passengers a year, and has a lot of offshore platform transportation via their helipad. The airport itself is constructed like a horseshoe, as you can see in the U shape around the center building here. And the center building is the multi-storey parking garage. This was built in 3 building steps. Building A is the oldest, and building B, where the fire started, and building C, which was the building that part of the building collapsed. You can see the wind direction during the incident at the bottom. This is a picture after the fire. And what you can see here closest to the camera is building C, and you can see that part of this building collapsed during the fire. And on this particular day, it was quite strong winds. And some other particular things that were going on was that the Norwegian Prime Minister was actually located at located in the airport area. As a consequence of this fire, the airport was closed for around 1 day. And the reason for the close down was that the fire brigade at the airport helped the local fire brigade. Here's another picture after the incident, seen from another angle. And now I will take you through some of the early events during the fire. So at around 3:30 in the afternoon, the first car starts burning. And 8 minutes and 40 seconds after this, the alarm center receives the first alarm. The fire service was dispatched at 9 minutes 29 seconds, and the first fire trucks leave the stations at 11 and 12 minutes. And only after 12 minutes and 50 seconds, the first manual alarm button was activated in the parking building, and alarm bells were activated. After 90 to 22 minutes, the first 2 fire trucks from the fire service were in place. All of these figures are based on the event log that was made by Rogaland Fire and Rescue Service. At the bottom here, you can see the events taking place locally at the airport. The airport control received a call from the heliport a few minutes after the fire, and they dispatched their fire and accident service. 10 minutes and 57 seconds after the fire started, the vehicle type was identified to be an Opel Zafira. That is not an electrical vehicle. And the first airport fire truck was in place around the same time as the first local fire brigade truck was in place. If we zoom a little bit out, you can see the last slide at the top left corner, and we're now looking at the 2 first days of the incident. So on 7th of January, the first car starts burning, and you have evacuation of people and considerable smoke production. There is a message from the police that parts of the building may collapse around 1 to 1.5 hours because of high temperatures. And at 16:47, all units are told to exit the building because of the potential of collapse. And then indeed, 10 minutes later, parts of the building started to collapse. And 20 minutes later, building 3 collapses. On the 8th of January, during the night, there was still a fire going on in the building and plenty of smoke development. In the afternoon on 8th of January, the fire service returned to the station, but had to return again to the site because of smoke development and heat coming from the collapsed part. And around 2 days or 47 hours after the incident started, the incident was terminated by the fire service. Like I said, during the incident, there was high winds, 11 to 19 meters per second. Here's a sketch of the extent of damage and the fire spread pattern during the fire. What you can see here to your right is building A. Building B is in the center where the black X mark the fire start. And to your left, you have building C. Undamaged vehicles is marked by green. Damaged vehicles and damage to construction is marked by pink. And the pink cross is the part of the building that had collapsed. The wind direction is given at the bottom right. As you can see, there is a clear fire spread pattern as a fan-like pattern going from where the wind is coming from and towards the other end. When it comes particularly to vehicles, this is the events that occurred. The fire started in a car. The first notification was car on fire. And this is important because notification to the fire brigade of car on fire sets out quite a different story than if you have the message of building on fire. After 15 minutes into the fire, there was a bang sound coming from the electric vehicle. And there was a dangerous fire spread to around 3 or 4 cars. After 16 to 18 minutes into the fire, there were observed flames and bangs are heard from several cars on fire. And at 18 minutes into the fire, 10 cars are reported to be on fire. And this is around the same time that the fire brigade came to the site. We don't actually know the total number of vehicles that were involved in the fire. The numbers vary, but we approximate it to be around a few hundred vehicles. And based on the availability of electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles in Norway, and the fact that those who tend to drive to an airport is expected to represent a slightly higher amount of newer vehicles, we expect that there are a few dozens of electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles that were in fact involved in this fire. So, what caused the fire to spread so rapidly? Well, during the fire, several of the vehicles in the parking facility had melting of their fuel tanks, giving leakages and spilling and running of fuel. And the off-gassing from these leakages ignited fires in new areas. And at some point during the fire, it was decided to change extinguishing tactics from using water to using foams, although it's not logged exactly when this decision was made. And when they started using foams as extinguishing measure, a lid was made on top of the fuel, removing the off-gassing. And our evaluation suggests that the foam perhaps should have been considered at an earlier stage. However, foam also has a poorer ability to being thrown than water. And they did use the wind to apply the extinguishing measures, or throwing it. Once they started using foam, they saw that it had a very good effect on extinguishing the fire and eliminating the problem. And it was at this point where they really started to gradually take down the fire. When it comes to the electric vehicles and their impact on the fire in particular, observation during the fire indicate that electric vehicles did not contribute to the fire development beyond what is expected from conventional vehicles. And this is based on visual observations from the fire brigade during the incident. And what we would have really liked to do here is to do further technical studies of the batteries from burned electric and hybrid vehicles to evaluate exactly to what degree the batteries from the different vehicles were involved in the fire. However, this has not been possible because of lack of funding. Some challenges in the early phase of the situation was that there was no direct alarm to the alarm central. Actually, it took 8 minutes before the alarm central was notified. There were no active fire safety measures, for example, extinguishing systems, and there were handheld extinguishers present, but they were not used during the initial phase of the fires. There was a lacking incident action plan for this specific object, and this led to unnecessarily use of time and delay. There was a challenge of access for the large vehicles to get to the position where the fire was because of the height of the floors. There was a challenge to find fire hydrants because they were connected to the private water system. And there was a long distance to the fire within the building. So smoke divers actually entered with regular length hoses of 50 meters, but the distance to the fire was 60 meters. And so they lost time when they had to go back outside the building, depressurize the hose and lengthen the hose by 25 meters. During any fire, the question always comes up, how are the environmental impacts from this fire? So this goes both for water pollution and also for smoke emissions. And what you can see here in the square is the airport area. And you can see a densely and sparsely populated areas to the east and north of the site. And then you can see the Solastrand nature reservoir to the left or west of the terminal. You can also see the position of the water cleaning park and the outlet from the water cleaning park. During the incident, a lot of extinguishing foams were used, but this led to a limited environmental impact. The extinguishing foams was found not to add substantial amounts of PFAS during the extinguishing efforts. And analysis conducted by COVI still actually showed PFAS content in all water samples, but this was linked to previous emissions. In the Solastrand nature reservoir, oxygen depletion as a result of release of extinguishing foam led to local toxic effects, but did not have a general negative long-term effect on sea life. We do, however, see that there is a need for stronger awareness of and focus on the use of extinguishing foams and logging of the amount of foams used in Norway. Here we think, for example, we can learn from Sweden. When it comes to smoke, there was quite a lot of smoke emission from the fire. And in the early phases of the fire, this spread north to the north, where there is a sparsely populated area. And the smoke direction was not in the direction of the terminal building or the densely populated area. The fire smoke, however, did affect evacuation of a nearby hotel. And eventually the wind turned in the direction of the higher population area, and a population warning was sent out. There was, however, a limited amount of health consequences for neighbors based on the low number of health consultations after the fire. The smoke content has not been analyzed. And specifically when it comes to electric vehicles, the water analysis of selected metals related to batteries were made, but did not show any lithium and only low concentrations of cobalt. And this indicates that the batteries in electric vehicles did not contribute to pollution of nearby water resources. And now, for the final part of the evaluation, we looked at the fire safety design and how this is related to Norwegian building regulations. For your information, Norway has a performance-based building regulation, and parking garages with more than one floor is placed in risk class 2 out of a total of 6. We have 4 different fire classes, and the current building was placed in fire class 3, And there is also a fire class 4 to be used if particularly large fire consequences for life, health, and environment or society. And under society, we have infrastructure such as airports. The different parts of the parking garage was built according to different regulations. A, B, and C was built on 3 different ones. And we have focused on building step B and C, as A was not affected by the fire. And we have found that changes in the regulations might have caused some confusion here. Here you can see a picture from building step B and building step C. You can see that the construction is different, despite the 2 building steps having more or less identical fire safety design. And we recommend that one should avoid uncritical reuse of content from older fire safety engineering concepts. When it comes to the load-bearing capacities, the pre-accepted performance level for the main load-bearing system was R90. And for some circumstances, the performance level may be reduced to R15, although this was not applicable for the Sola case. However, the fire strategy actually deviated from pre-accepted performance, giving R10. When it comes to sectioning, the specific fire load for this construction as given by the fire safety design, combined with the smoke ventilation with the current degree of wall openings. In this case, we find that the maximum area per floor in square meters without sectioning is 4,000 square meters. However, we see that the actual floor area without sectioning for each building is larger than this. And indeed, the total area of the buildings are in fact much larger than this. And some conclusions when it comes to fire safety design. We find that the fire safety design has shortcomings when it comes to load-bearing capacities, sectioning. We see that the holistic safety philosophy is important, and it's important to avoid uncritical reuse of content from older fire safety concepts. The Norwegian regulations regarding wall openings need to be revised. And we see that it's important to evaluate also the consequences for adjacent infrastructure and buildings. And so our opinion is that the multi-storey car park should have been placed in fire class 4 because of its proximity to important infrastructure for society. And we also see that to avoid confusion, when regulation changes are made, the authorities need to emphasize which changes have been made. Some conclusions related to other aspects. I did not go too much into this at this point, but we have identified several learning points from the firefighting efforts in our report. And when it comes to electric vehicles, it was found that they did not contribute to the fire development beyond what is expected from conventional vehicles, and there was a limited environmental impact. And so if you want to read the full evaluation of this incident, you can find this in a report in Norwegian and in English in our website. And I would like to thank Frick Project 1-2, Learning from Fire Investigations for sponsoring this presentation. And I would like to also thank you guys for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ragni, for this very interesting presentation on this event that really made it to the media. So we have received some questions here, and it's first a long text before the question comes. It is why it took 8 minutes to call the emergency number, but and he reports Hevesa about the media report. It says the local police have determined the fire began in 2:05, Opel Zafira diesel-powered car. The owner had just returned from vacation and noticed smoke coming from under the hood when he tried to start it. A second attempt to start the car resulted in flames that completely engulfed the car. So why took it such a long time then to call?
Do I understand the question correct? That they're asking if they already saw the flames in the beginning, why does it take 8 minutes? Is that somewhat what the question is?
Yeah.
Well, actually, the first person who, or the person who owned the first starting vehicle was a father of 3 or 4 children, I think, just coming from vacation, and they had more than enough with their hands up with just getting all of these children shuffled out of the area and away from the fire. And yeah, you also have a lot of different psychological barriers. You know, some people might think that other people have already alerted the fire brigade and I don't know what to do. Should I extinguish things? This will just be guessing from my side, but yeah, the very first person who saw this smoke at least did not alert, and yeah, because of the family.
Yeah, okay. And we have another question here. It is if you are free to use foam in Norway.
If it's allowed?
Yeah, I mean, if you can use it in all instances and so on, or if there's any restrictions on that?
It's a good question. I think the fire brigade, it's up to the fire brigade themselves to evaluate which extinguishing measures they want to use. And of course, not all types of foams are allowed to use, but most fire brigades have foams available. Yeah.
And we have maybe time for one final question here. What procedure was needed to follow to demolish or clean up the building afterwards, taking into account burned electric vehicles and batteries?
Well, when you have a burned vehicle and there's a battery inside of it, the insurance company and the car handling guys, they basically just took all of the damaged vehicles and placed them on a nearby field so that they could be stored there until further action for quite some time to really make sure that they were not reactive and active. And the really damaged vehicles were basically left inside of the building structure and demolished together with the rest of the building, rather than being removed.
Okay, thank you very much, Ragnhild. And there are still some questions in the Q&A, so if you have the possibility, perhaps you can answer them there. And then I would like to move on with the presentations here. So the next presentation will be given by Harvard Böhmer and Mikael Klassen, and it's well, continues on the same subject here: fire hazards of modern passenger vehicles in parking structures and vehicle carriers. So I will start the presentation and give the remote control to oh, there it is. Okay, so please, Howard, the floor.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm going to give a quick recap of a project we did for the NFPA Fire Research Foundation on the fire hazards of modern vehicles, specifically in parking garages and vehicle carriers, which has been discussed a little bit already. Mike and I work for Combustion Science and Engineering, and this was a project we did mostly last year. So there's a larger report that we published on the NFPA website where you can read more details about this. So let's see if I have, yeah, I have control. There we go. Oh, quick bio about us. I'm not gonna read all this. Yeah, I'm a senior engineer here, and Dr. Clausen is our research engineer. Let's see. Summary was this was based on from the NFPA's perspective. We've noticed that modern vehicles, meaning the last 20 years or so, compared to the 70s, where a lot of these codes are based on data from that age. Vehicles today are physically larger and heavier, and there's also, as in most things, there's more plastic usage. All of these things are going to have an impact on how much fuel is available in a fire. So we want to see how does this impact the fire risk and the codes from the NFPA. NFPA is a code writing body, so how does this impact the codes and standards? So we're going to look at this from kind of two angles, just looking at fire tests of vehicles, what's available out there in terms of modern vehicle testing versus older vehicles. And also looking at just the materials being used, the plastics they use, and how do these contribute to the fire. The goals were, like I said, mainly on focus on the code, from the code perspective. I'm going to try to steer away from the NFPA is a primarily US-based organization. We try to make this more of a global reach as well, but I'll be referencing some US codes, which I know not everyone is familiar with or use, but a lot of this applies. A lot of codes are very similar around the world, both in the US and Europe, so a lot of it applies both locations. So as we'll get to, in a lot of these parking garages, there are no requirements for sprinklers or any type of automatic detection or extinguishment of the fire. Is that something that should be changed or reevaluated? Parking garages are divided into open versus enclosed. How is that determined, and how does that impact a fire? And do modern vehicles burn hotter and or longer or in a different way than they used to 40 years ago? And finally, for research purposes and future research, what are the knowledge gaps? What's most critical that we study more, and how can we do further research? So just a quick recap of vehicle fires. This has been talked about in previous talks today already. So we have in the US, at least annually, there are just under 2,000 parking garage fires, not just vehicle fires. There's only 20 injuries. So civilian injuries are very rare in these fires, and almost no fatalities in most of them. So from a life safety perspective, the fires are not very critical, but there can be an outsized property damage impact, and also environmental and just problems. So that's mainly where this comes in and becomes a problem, is the property loss, and especially with those larger fires, as all been talked about. There's the fire on the top image here is a fire in Liverpool 3 years ago, where over 1,300 vehicles were damaged, and the building had to be demolished. And we already talked about the Stavanger fire, where the building collapsed, and there was, I believe, over $40 million in insurance losses. So some of these fires can be quite catastrophic and have a huge impact financially and environmentally. So the existing codes, distinguished is one. The main distinguishment in most of these is between open and enclosed. How that's defined vary somewhat, but generally, if all exterior and interior walls are, say, more than 20% open, it's an open parking garage, versus one that's enclosed, which means it's either sealed walls, it's inside another building, underneath a building, underground. So the requirements differ for these two types. Open parking structures are in general, sprinklers and fire alarms are not required. This varies somewhat between regions and especially within the EU, between countries. Some require sprinklers for, say, above a certain size, above a certain height, but in a lot of cases, it's not required at this time. In both the International Building Code and NFPA, and now certain places in Europe are now starting to either discuss or are directly requiring sprinklers in all open parking garages, or going to in the future. Except enclosed parking garages are often treated just as a regular building. Fire smoke alarms and sprinklers are required in these spaces. And finally, automatic stacker systems, where vehicles are lift systems stacked on top of each other, 2 or 3 or more high, have special requirements, are treated as, say, extra hazard by the NFPA, and require sprinkler systems as well. So we looked at the vehicle hazard, how it has evolved through a few different steps. Just quickly, we went through what are the full-size fire tests that are out there, what can we learn from them and compare different tests. How has the plastic content changed, and what's the impact of that? The plastic fuel tanks, or fuel tank failure in general. And then the growing use of alternative fuel vehicles, specifically electric vehicles. And then looking at marine vessels somewhat. Okay, so this plot shows the change in vehicles basically from the 1970s up to today. The two things we looked at here is the size, meaning the curb weight, which is not necessarily the physical size, but the weight of the vehicles, and the use of plastic. We do plastic energy here, but that's just how many kilograms of plastics times the heat of combustion is in the average vehicle. This is US numbers. We expect the numbers to be similar, at least in other Western markets and developed markets. So we see there's been a slow increase in the weight of the average vehicle. And there's been a quite dramatic increase in the amount of plastic energy that's available, almost a doubling of that number. And this is, of course, plastic's been replacing metals usually to make vehicles lighter, to comply with fuel efficiency standards. But still, the average size of vehicles are going up because consumers are buying bigger vehicles. So the average car has gotten bigger, even as it's gone down in using lighter materials. So just in general, looking at we looked at a lot of full-scale fire tests out there. Here's just some representative numbers from different decades, trying to see if we can see any trends. These are kind of representative. There's a pretty wide scatter in these numbers. So this doesn't necessarily show anything particular. It's just to show that we don't see any obvious trends. And it's also found by others who did statistical analysis on these numbers. And kind of problem we run into is that there's no unified way in how full-scale vehicle tests are performed. There's ignitions occurs inside the cabin, outside the cabin, in the engine, ventilation of the vehicle itself or of the space around is different. And obviously the size of the vehicles, how much fuel they have, it's no unified way. So we see it's really hard to compare, especially when you try to look at something from, say, 2010 versus 1980. You can't directly compare the vehicle tests. So we're going to talk about fire spread a little bit. Obviously very important, as we saw in these larger fires. It's when the fire is allowed to spread from the first vehicle to the 2 or 3 or 4 next to it. It can go very fast, and by the time the fire department arrives, they are not able to contain the fire. The BRE in the UK did some testing in 2009. They used cars that were about 10 years old at that time, I believe, so more than 20 years old now. And they started a fire in the car on the bottom right here, and it spread to the second car in 10 to 20 minutes, and then it jumped to the third one less than 4 minutes after that. So you see kind of a exponential growth as the fire heats up the layer above, and starts to preheat the vehicle next to it, and it can jump to the next car very quickly. And this is one of the main things we see with modern cars and the plastic usage, is that the fire spreads very quickly, both inside one vehicle and jumps to the next one. Especially when you start to have plastic materials on the outside of the vehicle, instead of having, say, a metal body, you have plastic components there on body panels, and we'll see a demo there. Yeah. So this was a video we found just earlier this year of it's an EV on the right here, started to burn in China. I think the fire started in it seems to be the fire on the charging cord. But what's interesting is that we see here that it jumps to the truck next to it very quickly, and we see the circle there. The fire jumps to around the tire on that truck, and then to the door handles, finally to the mirrors, and then eventually to the inside of the vehicle. This whole sequence of photos is only 2 minutes. So you see a fairly quick spread to that car next to it. So plastic fuel tanks, this came up from the firefighters, both in the Liverpool fire and then the fire in Norway. As he was saying, they saw running fuel pools burning. Most fuel tanks these days are made of plastic, high density polyethylene, which has a somewhat significant heat of combustion itself, so it can contribute to the fire. But also, more importantly, is once this obviously will melt and breach and the fuel will start to leak out, you will have running fuel on the ground, and you'll have a pool fire developing. The requirement for these fuel tanks is from the code here, ECE, which is 2 minutes of fire resistance of basically a pool underneath the car. The tank should not burst for 2 minutes. There's some testing done on various fuel tanks, somewhat limited sample, but they did some tests and they found that they lasted about 2 minutes to 4.5. So within 5 minutes, most of the fuel tanks had started to leak their contents onto the ground. And in some way, they didn't test anything beyond that to see how the pool developed and how that fuel could spread from there, which is what we would be interested in seeing more of. I'll get to that. So EVs, obviously a big topic of conversation. There's a few tests being done where they compared directly similar size type vehicles, where the manufacturer might have a model of one that's an internal combustion model and an EV of the same body, same style. These have been tested against each other under similar circumstances, and they have found that in general, there is no, the EV does not have a significantly higher heat of combustion or different burning rate than an internal combustion engine. The chemical energy or fire energy of the gasoline contents is much higher than from the battery. So from just looking at heat of combustion and how big is the fire, the EVs are not any worse than a gasoline vehicle here. The red line here is the ICEs, the internal combustion vehicles. Of course, there's more in difference in how they burn, as others have talked about with the thermal runaway issues, that the batteries can reignite for hours, and that you can have this jet flame effect that we see on the picture here from a EV that crashed into a house, I believe, and caught fire. So it's more from the firefighter's perspective, how do you fight the fire? But purely looking at heat of combustion, there's no significant difference there. So after compiling all the data on what we could find on the changes in fire hazard from the modern vehicles, we looked at design criteria, and basically in our case, looking at the NFPA codes and to some degree in National Building Code and various codes around Europe. How do they address these hazards? First, enclosed parking garages, as we say, the tests that have been done with sprinklers show that they are fairly good at controlling these fires. So when they are required, they can put out a car fire, or not, if not put it out, at least contain the fire long enough for the fire department to arrive and control the fire in that regard. There's been some lack of testing of sprinklers in what I call more challenging configurations, which you have large vehicles parked close together, or obviously stacker systems, or if they're parked in challenging in a corner or back to back, side to side. So that's something that should probably be evaluated further as the vehicles become larger and, like I said, have more spread between vehicles. And as photo illustrate here, the fire department access is becoming an issue as they try to cram parking into smaller and smaller buildings in urban areas to save space. Large fire trucks can have a hard time getting close enough to attack the fire. Real quickly, we looked at some marine carriers. This was talked about more earlier today. There are fairly strict safety requirements, much stricter than even normal parking garages on land. And there's certainly been dramatic fires, as we saw. But with worldwide enforcement of the code, these are fairly contained fire when they do occur. How often they occur is another issue, but the systems on board have been able to contain these fires using, say, they had the sprinkler system requirements and also now CO requirements and firefighting personnel on board. They have been able to put them out. So the main issue for us turned out to be the open parking garages, where, like I said, there is often no requirements for either detection or extinguishment. Both in the Liverpool fire and in Norway, it took over 20 minutes before anyone's even alerted. It took 10 minutes until people alerted, and took 20 plus minutes before the fire department arrived. And as we saw in the BRE testing, the fire can spread from 1 to 3 cars within those 20 minutes, potentially even the next car over. So you have 4, 6 cars burning very quickly. So, like I said, the plastic contents manifest itself as faster spread of fire both within the vehicle and to the next vehicles, making large fires more likely, potentially. And with no extinguish requirement, you are then only reliant on the fire department arriving in time to control the fire and put it out before it can spread to too many vehicles, whatever that number may be. Yeah, so here's just a reference of an NFPA standard for response time for firefighters, 5 minutes, but a lot of departments are not able to meet that goal already, and that's from when they are alerted. So if you're waiting for somebody to notice the fire and then alert them, it can take quite a while before they arrive. So this being the research foundation, they want to know what are the knowledge gaps, what are the most critical issues we should evaluate for future research into this issue. So, like I said, there are a few tests of fire spread, of full-size fire spread tests between cars, parking vehicles in different configuration, but at side to side or front to front, and seeing how quickly does fire jump from one car to another, and what are the important parameters for that to occur, and also potentially what are some mitigation measures. We could use barriers, or in the case of running pools, dike systems. So that's the next point, is the fuel tank failures. How long does it take for fuel tanks to fail? And when the fuel starts to run out and create this burning pool, is it able to ignite the next vehicle over? Or
Howard, sorry for interrupting, but the time is running, so maybe you can try.
yeah, I got 2 more, I think. Yeah, are sprinklers able to control these car fires? There's been some tests, but it's somewhat limited. What response? How quickly does the fire department have to be there to control a fire? And what are the risk of stacker systems? And finally, here they can talk to these. And how to define an open versus an enclosed parking garage? Yeah, I think I can jump through this. I already discussed this. So yes, conclusions: fires in park garages are rare, but they can have a huge economic impact. And here, older vehicles should not be used for design or regulation, by which I mean about mid 2000s. There's been a big change, as we saw in that graph of plastic content. So today, fire spread between vehicles is much more rapid than it used to be, and you can have fairly large fire with any type of vehicle. I think that's my last one. Yes. If anyone have any questions, sorry, I went a couple of minutes over there.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. And we have quite a few questions, so we will take some of them, and maybe then you can continue to answer them in the...
Sure.
Yeah. So the first one is the HRR of a modern vehicle has, despite the increased use of plastics, not increased compared to a car from the 1970s or the 1980s. On which fire test is this based on? I believe it was one of the slides you showed. There was several HRR curves where you had, yeah.
I would be a little careful with that one, because that's just one subset of one test. As I said, it's really hard to find comparable data from any decade, but we found tests from the 70s that had, say, 8 megawatts from a car, and we found tests from a few years ago that had 5. So it really depends on how the test is performed. In our report, we talk about kind of the percent mass loss. And when you reach above 20, say, percent or 17% mass loss, you reach that 8 megawatt fire, and that occurred in any scenario. So there seems to be some connection between, is the fire allowed to fully develop and fully engulf the car, and that dictates how big the fire gets, more than any type of materials used. So
okay, so I think we have time for one more quick question, and that is comparing the heat release rate trends versus decades would also benefit for comparing total heat released, more related to overall fire load available, whatever the the history. So,
yeah, that's kind of what I mentioned, and I think that's what we have some tables of in our full report is looking at that. Yes, heat released, heat consumed by the fire, and that's also what was done in some other. I think it was SparePoint who did some tests on that. But looking at how much total megajoules is consumed. That's probably a more accurate way to look at it. But we just, for design perspective, that the peak fire heat release rate does not appear to be dramatically different these days. It's more how quickly do you get there, and how quickly does it spread to the next vehicle. So you could look at our full report for more on that.
okay, thank you very much. So it is now time for a break again, and there are still questions in the Q&A.
Yep.
So please take a look there. And I also would like to remind everybody about the Menti. So please also take some time to look into these. And we will be back at 5 minutes past 5:30 kind of. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so welcome back to the last session of today. And we will start right away with Dorota Brzezinska from Poland. We'll talk about the design fire of passenger vehicles, how to decide about it. And you are with us, Dorota?
Yes, I am.
Good, so then I will just give you the control. And yeah, the word is yours.
Thank you, Ola. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your introduction. My presentation today will be about designing of fire in car parks and how to decide about this. This is a question. And I will introduce you why I have many doubts in doing this. I represent Lodz University of Technology from Poland, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. Yes, it's working, thank you. At the very beginning of my presentation, I'd like to bring out the design car fire size as the most important factor of car parks fire protection system designed parameters. The scope of my presentation will include a discussion about actual design car fire curves advised by different standards, a review of the latest British and Polish car fire statistical data, and a presentation of 44 car fire test results collected in one diagram. The goal of this is to discuss the collected fire statistics and fire test data, to present an average car fire curve from all collected fire test data, and to discuss possibilities of creating a uniform, optimal design car fire curve. The graph at the slide presents a selection of heat release rate curves published in available standards, guides, and reports around the world. The variation of these curves illustrates the issues faced by fire engineers when developing their designs. The most contentious seems to be the heat release rate value taken after 15 minutes from fire ignition, which represents a period that most often covers fire service intervention time. And we can see here that this heat release rate varies from about 1.5 megawatts to around 10 megawatts. Also, a huge differences of the curves can be observed later after 15 minutes. However, in our opinion, the first 15 minutes is the most important period which should be taken into account. Also, the next slide compares the different curves. Here is visible that within the first 220 minutes, when the most often the evacuation from the car park is expected, the differences of design heat release rates are even more significant than it was before within the 15 minutes. The three representative curves most popular in Poland were chosen here for the comparison. It's visible that when the Janssens curve in this time gives about 360 kilowatts, the British standard recommends 550 kilowatts, but the Netherlands standards recommends even 3 times more than the Janssens, which makes about 1,320 kilowatts. Also, the FDS simulations demonstrated the different results when the 3 curves were used. The visibility distribution in an exemplar car park at the height of 1.8 meters from the floor is shown here in this 222nd time, which as previously is expected to be evacuation time from the car park. It is visible that in the case of the Netherlands curve taken into account for the simulation, which is at the 3rd picture, the visibility taken as a tenability limit couldn't be met. A huge area of the car park is covered with the smoke. In the same time, using the curve from BS standard or Janssens curve, the situation is much better. The design heat release rate has also a significant influence on a car park smoke control system requirements when we have to design the smoke control systems. The assumption here is using the BS standard for designing smoke control systems in the car parks. The exemplar heat release rates of 2 megawatts, 4 megawatts, and 8 megawatts were taken here into account, with other fire parameters which are required for the calculations. In consequence, the required exhaust capacity of 9.58, 16.65, and 28.29 cubic meters per second were achieved. It can be observed that taking the 8 megawatt heat release rate as 100%, because it's the most common fire size used in Poland for smoke control systems designing, the reduction of heat release rate to 2 megawatts or 4 megawatts would allow reducing ventilation to less than 35 and 60% of the basic volume flow. So in our opinion, the big question here is which exactly heat release rate should be used for doing these designs. The answer to this question could be supported by statistical data. The figures here shows the total number of vehicle fires in the UK and Poland from 2010 to 2018. The analyzed British data shows an average of nearly 16,000 car fires per year, pointing to an annual average of 0.47 per mile of all registered cars burned in UK. When the same data from Poland shows an average of about 7,000 cars per year burned, which makes about 0.35 per mile of all registered cars. It is also interesting that almost half of fires recorded in the analyzed period in the UK were classified as deliberate fire. The other half is assumed to be accidental fires. Unfortunately, in Poland, such detailed data is not allowed. We don't have such detailed data, so we cannot compare it. The next significant consideration is the response time of fire rescue service. The response time is taken here as the period between the alarm call being made and the first vehicle fire attendance at the site. In this case, the British and Polish statistics are very similar. In most cases, the response time is between 5 and 10 minutes. However, in Poland, it's often even below 5 minutes. In both cases, the most expected fire rescue service attendance time to a fire could be taken as being within 15 minutes. In both cases, about 90% of situation represent this time period. The British statistics present additional data of areas affected by a fire on fire brigade arrival time. And it could be found here that the vehicles get fire most often in the engine space and internal space. However, also external fires are very common. The damage recorded at the fire brigade arrival time and the fire growth are also covered by the British data. It's feasible that the most often the whole vehicle could be expected as being damaged. However, in 1/3 of the cases, only the engine compartment could be destroyed, and in about 20% of the cases, the vehicle's interior could be burned. All this data could be taken into account when the expected fire size is taken under advisement. Except of this statistical data, the real scale vehicles fire tests are available, which will be presented now. This graph is representing a number of large-scale experiments which have been carried out, and here we can see the results of 44 fire tests which have been collected and are presented in one diagram for making easier their comparison. All the presented data represent the curves of the singular fire tests. On the basis of the fire test curves, the average heat release rate was designated, and it's presented here by the red line. Also, the positive standard deviation curve is presented here by the dashed red line. And the full list of references used for this material, because it could be not visible well here, could be found in the conference article on the website, which I advise you to visit. In the next step, the statistical information and the average fire curve were taken into account together. And in consequence, the references of car fire curves were proposed. The graph presents a basic red fire curve, which is already known from the previous graph, with its positive standard deviation values presented by the dashed line. Alternatively, a curve which represents two cars fire is shown here by the black line. This curve for the heat release for two cars was created on the base of the curve of one car, which was doubled, assuming that the second fire starts after 12 minutes from the beginning of the first car fire. Also, the 15 minutes response time is presented here, and the heat release values for at the several curves can be written here from the graph. The results show that the average heat release rate of both the single and double car fire at the moment when the car, when the fire brigade arrives, is expected of about 2 megawatts. In the event of continuous growth in the time after 15 minutes, the peak heat release rate could be taken approximately 2 megawatts for single car fire and 3 megawatts for the double fire. More conservative approach could increase these values to 4 megawatts and 8 megawatts respectively by adding the standard deviation values. My intention of this presentation was to demonstrate my doubts if the standard vehicle fire sizes presented at the very beginning of my presentation, which come from different standards, are really reasonable for our daily designing routine. The conclusion of my presentation could be a statement that the design fire heat release rate for the car parks used around the world could be revised and standardized, taking into account actual statistical data with the newest fire test results and a sustainable view of the designing process. And I'd like to mention also at the very end that the more detailed information on this research could be found in the article Design Car Fire Size Based on the Fire Statistics and Experimental Data, published this year in the Fire and Materials Journal, and also at the webpage where the conference materials are available. Thank you very much and welcome to the questions.
Thank you, Dorota. So we have one question here in the Q&A. So for the highly engaging, interesting comparison between UK and Polish vehicle fires, what do you think the relative benefits might be of building a fire-resisting enclosure around the passenger cabin in cars or the battery compartment?
I couldn't hear very well. I'm sorry, Ola, but I exactly can't understand what is going on in this question. What is the point?
Yes, so I think the question here was so what about building an fire-resisting enclosure around the passenger cabin for the battery compartment? So I guess it's I don't know what this is meaning here, really. Do you understand, Petra?
Yeah, yeah. I think the question is if there would be any benefit of adding a fire-resisting enclosure around the passenger cabin or around the battery compartment. So adding more fire barriers in the vehicles.
Yes. Okay, thank you for the explanation. It's a very new idea. I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to answer for such exactly difficult question. I don't know how technically it could be realized, and also I'm not sure if it would be helpful, because you could assume that only half of the car would be involved in the fire, because the second part would be divided by the fire barrier. But I think it would be rather to ask techniques from the car's construction if it's really possible. I think that many elements are passing from one part to another to the car, and it would be very difficult to make such separation.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So another question then. Do you carry out car fire tests by yourself or just collecting statistics?
Yes, generally these statistics are available in the article and also at the web page in the conference material, so we can share it if it's expected and necessary. Yes.
Yes. So, and I have also just a question. So one of your conclusion was just that, of course, I think it's good to use actual statistical data and average fire load. But could it, or do you think you should use these average values when designing structures and so on, or could it be reasonable to also use a worst case scenario as a design fire?
My daily routine is evaluation of smoke control systems in car parks, and I observe how huge differences, as I shown at the smoke control calculation, how huge influence of different heat release rates of car is observed onto the smoke control system parameters. So exactly, I don't feel responsible for making a decision, but I just wanted to present the influence of the decision which we make, in my opinion, very fast, and which about the heat release rate of the vehicle. And I wanted to demonstrate how huge influence on the costs of the car parks fire systems it creates. And exactly what was my intention is to start a discussion about this and to look for a sustainable approach, which in my opinion should be created.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Dorota. So we will move on. And then we have Judy Jabarian, and I don't know if I pronounce your last name correctly, but you can correct that. So she will present studies on thermal runaway and fire and gas characterization of lithium-ion cells and batteries.
Hello.
Hello, Judy. So I will just start
Let me
presentation and give you the control. So here you go. The floor is yours.
Okay. I cannot show my video because it's okay. I guess I can show it now. Thank you. And this is in PowerPoint mode.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Okay. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about thermal runaway and fire characterization for lithium-ion cells and modules that we have carried out some testing in our labs. I'm unable to move it.
You have to click once with your mouse and then you can move it.
Okay. Okay. So our group is the battery safety group in Underwriters Laboratories. We are on the nonprofit side of UL. And our goal is to advance safer energy storage through science by our research. And I'm still not able to move the presentation, move my mouse. Okay, I can do it now. So our group does research, as I said, and we share our scientific data at conferences, writing papers, and talking in public forums, doing webinars, and so on. We do outreach by conducting battery safety summits and safety councils, and we also do some training based on our knowledge and our expertise. So today I'm going to talk quickly about a few things about the thermal runaway studies we've done and the fire characterization we've carried out on 2 different battery cathode chemistries for lithium-ion cells. And I'll quickly mention in one chart the preliminary fire suppression studies we've done for some of the small lithium-ion modules that we've studied. So as you all know, lithium-ion battery was first commercialized in the early 1990s, and it still has the highest energy density of all rechargeable battery chemistries today. It does not have a memory effect. It has long cycle and calendar life, and also very good rate capability. So it's used in a myriad of applications, starting from consumer electronics all the way to electric vehicles and also stationary grid energy storage. And today you also see it in the use in marine as well as space applications. But associated with this high energy density is also the propensity for this particular battery chemistry to experience fire and thermal runaway if it is not designed or used correctly. And due to the proliferation of this battery chemistry, we have so many hundreds of manufacturers of lithium-ion cells and batteries today. And we see that not all of these cell and battery designs are characterized stringently. And not all of them are also certified. And so we see a lot of the low quality ones and also inexpensive ones that you can actually buy quickly online. And so characterizing thermal runaway for the various combinations of cathode and anode, as well as the different electrolyte combinations that are used, the additives that are used, and so on. And also to look at the various form factors that they come in, the various capacities that they come in, and so on. This is a big challenge. So what we also see, as we've seen, in the other presentations this morning or this afternoon, is that the fire suppressants for lithium-ion batteries is also not optimized. It's a major challenge to the industry, especially for the electric vehicle industry. So today I'll address some of the challenges of characterizing thermal runaway and also talk quickly about the suppressants and the methods. So, what is thermal runaway? Thermal runaway, Wikipedia explains it as a repeating cycle in which excessive heat causes more heat until the operation ceases or an explosion occurs. And of course, they give lithium-ion batteries as one of the examples. The other one is a germanium-based bipolar transistor, where high temperatures can cause currents to leak, heat up even more, and eventually become unstable or self-destruct. And if you look at lithium-ion standards, the way we describe thermal runaway is that it's an accelerating heat, release of heat inside a cell due to a series of uncontrollable exothermic reactions manifesting as an uncontrolled increase in cell temperature. So the word uncontrolled, is very relevant to the, very relevant to the word thermal runaway. So, If you look at the lithium-ion charge and discharge process, during the charge process, lithium ions go from the cathode to the anode and sit in between the layers of the anode. It's called intercalation, and these lithium ions are held between the layers of the graphite in the anode by what are called van der Waals attraction. And then during the discharge process, they go back to the parent cathode material. As we all know, and we've seen this morning, there are many battery incidents associated with lithium-ion batteries these days, and has been for the past 2 decades. Even in a single cell battery that powers e-cigarette, there can be a lot of damage if there is a problem with it, as you can see in the first picture on the left here. And then we've seen hoverboard fires that affected many people a few years ago. We've also seen fire incidents in cell manufacturing facilities. We've seen shops burned down because of polymer battery fire. And we've also seen fires in battery recycling facilities. The challenge today is that in the early 1990s, we saw that this chemistry was used in really small consumer type devices, portable devices, and the energy in them was between 20 to 30 watt hours. And then we went on today to use them in electric vehicles as well as in stationary grid storage. When we look at the electric vehicles, depending on what types they are, whether they are hybrids or plug-in hybrids or pure electric, the energy in the battery could be between 25 to 30 kilowatt hours. But when you look at the stationary grid storage, it's even higher. It's in the megawatt hour to the gigawatt hour range. So the challenges are really higher compared to what we had when we were using these in our portable equipment. And lithium-ion cell hazards can be divided into 3 types. One is a thermal hazard, the second is a mechanical hazard, and the third type is an electrical hazard. So today, I know I'm just going to give you a little bit of idea about what I call electrical hazards. I also included thermal, just the temperature environments, because they can lead to electrical hazards. So the causes for the electrical hazards are, first of all, overcharge, where you take it beyond or at a voltage, to a voltage higher than the manufacturer specification. If you do repeated over discharge that is followed by a charge, you could have a hazard. If you have external shorts, it could be a high or low impedance type. You can have a hazardous condition because of that. And also the last one is internal shorts, which could be due to manufacturing defects or a misuse in the field where an overcharge or the repeated overcharge followed by charge happens, or external shorts happen. So they can also, these causes can also lead to internal shorts that are created in the field that can then result in a catastrophic failure. And with respect to the thermal environments, both high and low temperatures can actually cause a problem in the lithium-ion cell. So today I'm going to give you some information on the tests we've done on 2 different battery chemistries. One is cells, 25 ampere cells that have the NMC cathode. This is a single cell. And then we looked at the module, which is a 75 ampere module, where we had 3 cells in parallel, giving the 75 amp hours. And then we looked at what we call a battery. It's actually a larger module that is within an automotive battery. And this module has a 75 ampere capacity, which is the 3 cells in parallel. And we have 4 of these banks in series to give us 12 cells total, but a 3P4S configuration. So this is about 16 volt battery. And then we have the LFP cathode of the same concept, but the cell is very small. It's a 5.5 amp hour cylindrical cell. And we had to have about 15 cells in parallel to give a similar capacity as the other one. This is actually a commercial battery pack that we purchased, the LFP battery pack. And we have 4 of these 15P modules to give the same voltage that the other module has, which is about 16 volts. So I'm going to show you the thermal runaway test we did using a patch heater for the cell, the module, and the battery pack. And here I want to show the first one is for the 25 amp hour NMC cell. In this particular case, what we saw was only smoke. And I'm going to play the next video for the iron phosphate cell, which is the LFP cell. And what we found here was, that there were two different instances. In one sample, we had both fire and smoke, and in the other one, we had only smoke. This is very interesting because typically everyone thinks of an LFP cell as something very benign and that you don't see a fire in it. But what we found is that you could have instances where some of the cells can also experience a fire. So going on to the next one, I wanted to show you what thermal runaway in an NMC looks like. So we heat up the cell at about 10 degrees C per minute. So you keep going up, and then we see the first part where a vent occurs. And the vent is actually established not only by a drop in voltage, but also by a slight drop in temperature, where the cell is experiencing a cooling effect because of the gas venting out. And then we continue to heat the cell because the cell has not gone into thermal runaway yet. And at about 213 degrees C, you can see the sharp increase in temperature, which indicates that thermal runaway has happened. You can see the picture of the cell on the right side with the heater that covered most of the face. Because this is a 25 amp hour cell, we had to use a little bit of a bigger heater to take it into thermal runaway. And you can see the position of the thermocouples that we used. For the LFP cell, it's a little bit more difficult to tell the venting and thermal runaway temperature. But here, this is the area where the venting happened, and this is the area where thermal runaway happened. And as you can see, we actually wrapped the cell with a heater that covers most of the cell surface. Our intent is only to take it into a worst case thermal runaway. So we used a larger heater here also that covers almost the entire surface of the cell. And you can see the thermocouples, presence of thermocouples. And we had the same heating rate as we did for the other cell. So this is the thermal runaway for the module. And in this case, we saw for the NMC, we saw both fire and smoke. And what you see here on the bottom is the placement of the heaters, where we had to use two heaters on either side of the cell, of cell 2 in the middle cell to take it into thermal runaway. And we saw, as I said, fire and smoke. And in the case of the LFP modules, again, we had a little bit of a variation where one module actually showed smoke only, and the other module showed both fire and smoke. And as you can see here, we had only the center cell that had the heater attached to it that took the cells into thermal runaway. It takes a little while for that center cell to heat up, and then you can see that it goes into thermal runaway, and then we see a fire. Going a little slower than I expected. Okay. So this is the next one where we looked at the larger battery module or the battery level. And here you can see that this cell was fitted with heaters on both sides. This is cell number 5, which is closer to the middle of the pack. And in this case, we saw fire and smoke. And in the case of the LFP, it was quite different because it's an enclosed battery. And we have 4 modules in it. And they are, just setting off one cell did not take the battery into thermal runaway. So we had, and also because the way the battery is designed, there are beefy or heavy metallic plates that actually hold the cells in place. And so the heat was getting dissipated into the plates rather than transferring as thermal propagation. So we had a tough time actually. I'm sorry. We had a tough time actually taking it into thermal runaway. And so we had, as you can see here, we had to fit many cells with heaters, multiple cells with heaters to take it into thermal runaway. So I wanted to give you an idea of the gases that I evolved. So when you look at the 25 amp hour cell, based on the chemistry, it's about 95 watt hours. It released about 41 liters of gas. And if you look at the types of gases that are coming out, and you look at the LFL, you can see that carbon monoxide and hydrogen are quite high compared to the LFL. We also see ethylene and propylene that are higher than the LFL levels. And when you look at the next LFP cell, this is only a 5.5 amp hour cell. We got 3 liters of gas that was evolved. It's an 18 watt hour cell, but you can see this cell was completely charred at the end. And so what we find is that all the carbon monoxide is actually converted to carbon dioxide. And we have a really high concentration of hydrogen compared to the LFL. We have a high concentration of methane as well as ethylene. And when we look at the battery packs, we have the data for the modules too, but due to lack of time, I wanted to keep going with showing you the battery pack information for NMC cell, which is a 1.1 kilowatt hour cell. You can see that the total volume of hydrocarbons is about 165 liters. The gas carbon dioxide is quite high, and then you also have a lot of hydrogen evolved. When you look at the LFP, you see that the amount of hydrocarbons is much higher than even the NMC type, and then the hydrogen volume is also much higher. And the interesting part is that these values are not correlated directly to the cell level values. So that tells you that you need to do the test at the right configuration in order to fully understand it. So one of the challenges we've had is that HF is produced. We know that HF is produced in large quantities from lithium-ion cells because of the use of additives or the electrolyte salt, which is lithium hexafluorophosphate, and also because of the binder, which is PVDF in a lithium-ion cell. And but we have been having a lot of difficulty detecting it because it condenses on the walls of the chamber and the pipes. And we've talked to Professor Melander and his student, who you are all quite familiar with, especially the Rice Institute, on how to carry out these tests. They have done a lot of modeling work also on this, and they provided a safety webinar to the UL Safety Battery Safety Science webinar series that we conducted, which was on September 30th. So we need better analytical methods to actually determine HF concentrations, and that's something we'll be working on in the next couple of months. What I also wanted to mention is that in the gas analysis of the Arizona battery fire, what we found is that there were very high concentrations of hydrogen cyanide. Hydrogen cyanide is typically not found in lithium-ion cells, but it is found at the battery level. So that tells us that there are other materials that can also contribute to toxic gases as byproducts. And we've also heard with many of these energy storage fires that there are many reasons why there are all these fires occurring, and it could be because of insufficient battery protection, or the integration was not done correctly, or the way the protective controls worked were not in the right order. So one of the things that we need to do is, whether it is an electric vehicle or a larger a grid energy storage fire, is to be able to get the BMS data independent of the battery system, so one can access it remotely and advise the first responders and the firefighters on how to go about working with it. And as I mentioned, fire suppression systems are really not optimized yet. And I just wanted to quickly show you some of the tests we've done. We have looked at different fire suppression methods and systems, and in some cases it works, in some it does not. So in general, I would like to say that thermal runaway can occur due to 3 different types of causes, mainly understood well with lithium-ion cells. And the events accompanying the thermal runaway can vary quite a bit. You can have venting, or you can have fire and smoke, or a combination of any of these. And also cell-to-cell variation can be a challenge, because that can then require multiple tests where especially if one cell goes into a fire, but only another cell from the same lot shows only smoke. And we need to understand the toxic and flammable gases that are released based on the environment. So, we talked about the enclosed spaces in cars and the passenger compartment. So the toxicity of the gases evolved, or the flammable nature of the gases, should be understood based on that volume. And fire extinguishing methods obviously need to be optimized for the size and nature of the battery itself, because it's dependent on the chemistry. So I would thank you for listening, and I would like to acknowledge our collaborators, Dr. Praveen Gandhi and Alex, who did most of the fire characterization studies, and my team, Dr. Juarez Robles and Saad. And thank you.
Yes, thank you, Julie, for that presentation. A lot of information. So one question here in the Q&A. So what state of charge are the cells that you showed in the tests?
All of them are at 100% state of charge.
Okay, good. And yeah, there was also a question of HF, but you mentioned that. What about other toxic gases? Did you measure other toxic gases like hydrogen cyanide or hydrogen chloride and so?
We did not measure HF because it's very difficult to measure HF. It gets condensed on the walls of the chamber, and that is what I mentioned. But in the next couple of months, we have found a couple of ways in which we can actually detect HF. One is the laser analysis method that we are going to use. We can also use some other wash bottle type things that will dissolve the HF, and then we can use it for take it for analysis after that. But at this time, we were unable to detect HF because it gets condensed on the walls of the chamber, and we did not detect any HCN at all. Because I think the materials that were used in the batteries that we tested and the modules we tested did not have as much plastic that would release the cyanide.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And then with regard to the suppression test that you showed, so what do you think about those tests? Were they repeatable, or could you draw any conclusions with regard to the different agents and so on?
Yes. We, with water, we found that, of course, that is the best one, but you need to start it a little early so you can cool down the battery or the module at the source of the fire. That is the main criteria. Another thing we also found is that if you use cold nitrogen, and I don't have that listed here, but if you use cold nitrogen, you can actually prevent propagation, and you can cool down the battery also. Again, everything depends on whether you have the material near the source of the trigger cell or the source of the heat. The statics is also the same thing. If you use it, you have to make sure that the gas that comes out of this extinguisher is around the cells that has gone into thermal runaway or has had a fire. If the statics dissipates, then the fire comes back again. So you have to make sure that there's enough concentration of these extinguishers in the area to cool the cells that are experiencing the heat and the self heating.
Yeah, thank you. So one last question from the Q&A here. Is there any detection system to foresee a thermal runaway, you think?
To foresee a thermal runaway? I think that's a hard one. Everyone's been trying. People are trying to use sensors, gas sensors. But, if you have a vent and you're sensing gas, it's already a concern. But if you can use very cold, if you can cool down the trigger cell or the heated cells very quickly and maintain the cold environment, then you can prevent it from going into a thermal runaway, because there is a gap between venting and thermal runaway. There are other electrical methods that have been looked into, like looking at the impedance and so on, but there's a lot of noise that is associated with it, and it's also very difficult to tell exactly which area of the battery has undergone a problem. So right now, I think it's a more bigger challenge, and I don't think we have a solution for that yet.
Thank you very much, Judy. So we will go on to the last presentation of today. It's Brian Herbst, and he will talk about heavy truck fuel tank protection in frontal impacts. Are you with us, Brian?
I'm here.
So then you should have the control, and the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much. Today I'm going to be speaking about heavy truck fuel tank protection and frontal impacts. Fires in heavy trucks have long been a source of fatalities and serious injuries in heavy truck accidents. Fuel tanks on these trucks are vulnerable to impacts and can release large amounts of combustible fluids. My paper analyzes a real-world truck accident involving a frontal offset crash with a resulting fire. I've also got some laboratory testing and finite element analysis to help understand the effectiveness of front underride protective devices and fuel tank guards. Many early vehicles had fuel tanks that were mounted outside the frame rails. And as you can see, modern vehicles have generally gone away from this, moving the tanks to the inside or in between the frame rails for protective purposes. Fire-associated fatalities in diesel fuel road trucks are 15 times higher compared to passenger cars, and the 1983 study showed that, or suggested that there could be some improvement by strengthening the front axles and moving the tanks away from the absolute edge of the vehicle. An 86 study also found that 16% of heavy truck fatalities were involved in post-crash fires, whereas passenger cars only had 4%. And they identified mechanisms that could cause the rupture of the fuel tank, one of which was frontal impacts with low objects that could impact front axles, battery boxes, which could then contact the tank. A 1986 study by the Department of Transportation called the Heavy Truck Safety Study identified post-crash non-cargo related fires as a safety issue, and it suggested again at that point in time that front-end structures could be designed for energy absorptions and to deflect and manage frontal offset impacts. In 1994, the United Nations ECE published a standard R93 regarding the design of front underride protective devices. This was adopted in 2003, or rather required, and was also adopted and required in Australia in 2009. This standard required a series of force requirements at different points on the front structure, requiring between 80 kilonewtons and 160 kilonewtons, depending on the location. Fuel tank guarding is another method used in smaller vehicles by placing the fuel tank between the frames, as I just discussed. But in larger vehicles, we also see it as well in vehicles such as buses, which are built on heavy truck platforms often, and they do have a side impact requirement. So many of those vehicles place heavy-duty guards around the fuel tank itself to help protect it from direct strikes. The real-world crash that we investigated involved two heavy trucks, tractor-trailer combinations. The accident occurred based on GPS data from the vehicle that struck another truck, that it was traveling approximately 114 kilometers per hour, which is freeway speeds here. The subject vehicle was approaching a stopped truck, was unable to avoid the impact, but did attempt to do so and attempted to steer away from the accident itself. Here's the configuration based on the accident reconstruction of this particular accident, that the vehicle was attempting again to veer to the left to avoid the stopped truck and had an approximate angle of 7 degrees and an overlap of about 1 meter. What you see here in red is the axle displacement, which was nearly 2 meters rearward, and during the impact and engagement with the other trailer, and was driven into the fuel tank itself, which ruptured and caused a fireball explosion, which was actually caught on video from a truck traveling the opposite direction. Following the collision, the subject truck was traveling about 70 kilometers per hour and came to rest in a grassy median. Here's the video capturing, and you'll look in the upper left-hand corner for fire that occurred. And here's the resulting aftermath. Again, you can see where the right front wheel was supposed to be with the green circle, and it displaced rearward, again, approximately 2 meters into the fuel system position or fuel tank position. So what we attempted to do was, in order to understand the accident and the forces involved a little better, we conducted a sled impact test with a sled weighing approximately 2,300 kilograms, impact velocity of about 36 kilometers per hour. And it was offset just outside of the frame rail, similar to what's occurring in the accident, in order to understand what it takes to break the axle free, what are the forces and the energy. Here's a video of that impact test. As you can see, we have a sled running down a track. It's being driven by a gravity drive system. You can see the axle breaks free relatively easily and impacts the fuel tank. You can see it a bit here that there's quite a number of sparks created during the impact, particularly as the axle releases and begins to slide. Obviously, that potential ignition source for the fuel system if it's penetrated as well. As was clear, the right front wheel assembly was driven back into the leading edge of the fuel tank, which was broken free, and we did actually get some fuel leakage from the tank. Also, I've taken a still from the above camera to show the sparks again, and that obviously being a potential risk for ignition. The next step in our analysis was to create a finite element model. We utilized a publicly available heavy truck model that was developed by the National Transportation Research Center and utilized LS-DYNA as a solver. What we did was essentially model the sled test you just saw. And you can see that the kinematics are similar. The next part in the finite elements analysis was to put in a FUPD, which was a 152 millimeter square steel tube, approximately 6 millimeters thick, with relatively high yield strength, to see if it could provide adequate protection under these impact conditions. The FUPD did deform significantly during the impact, but it did keep the axle from breaking away and thereby reduce the probability of a fuel tank rupture and fire. This is a still grab of the, it's a video. It's a video of the FUPD on the right and the baseline simulation we saw on the left. As you can see, there's a dramatic reduction in the deformation and penetration of the sled into the truck frame. The next step was we conducted a series of 3 finite element analysis that involved the complete tractor trailer setup, where we had a tractor trailer traveling at highway speeds, again, about 105 kilometers per hour. And we did 3 runs. One was a baseline run where we had an offset impact to the back of the trailer, one with a FUPD on the striking vehicle, and then finally a run with an FUPD and a guard around the tank, fuel tank itself. So here's an overview of what that simulation looks like. This is an underbody shot of the impact. You'll see the axle driven back into the green fuel tank, which is then compressed between the frame and the axle itself. Here's a comparison of the baseline, and then on the right we have the FUPD, which you can see up here is slightly deformed. And while the FUPD did still allow the axle to displace rearward, it did reduce or attenuate the impact forces or the energy transferred into the tank. This is what the 2 tanks look like, the baseline and the FUPD. Obviously, the baseline sustained far more damage than the FUPD tank, and the damage energy was reduced approximately 37% when the FUPD was used during this impact. Final comparison was between a vehicle equipped with an FUPD, but also had a tank guard. The guard was made out of 50 millimeter square tubing that was approximately 4.75 millimeters thick, and it was also covered in thin sheet metal to completely enclose the fuel tank. As you can see, the FUPD once again helped in deflecting the vehicle off of the impact, and the tank guard helped eliminate any significant contact between the axle and the tank itself. So the conclusion from our analysis was that common heavy trucks, the construction of them in the United States are vulnerable to frontal impacts, and also the construction places smaller impacting vehicles at risks. Offset impacts can compromise steering components, displace axles, and can potentially engage the fuel tanks. One point I should note is that one advantage of the FUPD also is in protecting in maybe lower impact environments. By protecting the steering components, it allows the driver to potentially maintain control of the truck after a particular impact. Offset impact test, sled impact testing was an effective methodology for evaluating the offset frontal impact mode and demonstrated component failures consistent with what was seen in real world accidents. Finite element analysis proved effective at matching results of laboratory testing. And we did demonstrate that the front underrun protective devices proved effective at speeds even up to 105 kilometers per hour with significant reductions in damage energy, and that a combination of FUPD and tank guarding provided significant protection at speeds of 105 kilometers per hour and essentially eliminated impacts between the axle and the fuel tank. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Brian. So we have at least one question here in the Q&A. So the model is based on a vehicle without anti-roll bar and shock absorber, which is holding axle in position as well. Why?
I think some of those elements, the shock absorbers are there, although they are modeled as spring elements in the system, so they aren't modeled as shell elements, and that's just the way the model was built and validated originally. So we weren't attempting to rebuild and create a shell structure for that, but there are a number of elements that don't particularly show up just because of the way LS Dyna visualizes them.
Okay, thank you. And I have a question here. So you show the FUPD, but there have been no real testing on that. It's just simulations, as I understand it. So is there a plan for any validation of the simulation with regard to those protection with the tank guard and the FUPD?
Certainly the FUPD, we continue to do and evaluate those physically. At the time we did this, given certain laboratory and time constraints, we weren't able to physically construct it and validate that at that time. Given the simple nature of the FUPD we were doing, we felt that the model could certainly handle the approximation of a square tube, but certainly as we continue to do further physical testing, which we are, we'll probably continue to build on that model and validate future versions of the FUPD.
Yeah, okay. And then do you think there will be any changes to regulations due to the incidents that you show, or the incident that you show, for example, with the side impact testing as is this for buses?
I would like that to be the case. At this point, we've seen a number of these types of cases, and rulemaking here tends to be incredibly slow. So at this point, I don't anticipate that there will be any sort of legislation to do that, although there have been small discussions about that. I have not seen any great appetite or desire to implement anything like that at this time, although I think it would be incredibly helpful. And I think we're one of the few places that still around the world does not have some sort of front underride protective legislation, or at least has manufacturers that are still not implementing those.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much, Brian. And I think there was no more questions. So then we are finished with the presentations. I think since we have some minutes left, we can just check if people have answered on the Menti. So I will just go in and start that one. Just a minute. Let's see, here we have it. So I will share this instead. So here is the first question that were in the Menti poll. So we can see that, yeah, mostly Europe, not so strange since we are in that time zone. And there is people answering right now. That's why it changed a little bit. We could also look at the next question, I think. Yeah, so here we also see that there's, yeah, it's just 60 people that have answered yet, but please, you can go in and answer, and there will be the same code tomorrow as well. So this will be able to be updated tomorrow. So about half of you would have attended the live event in Amsterdam. So that's interesting. Yeah, we can also see, yeah, many people are actually new, have not participated in previous 5. And yeah, some answers. I think we will look also tomorrow to see if they have been updated. So this is just a pre-visit, you can call it, and please go in and answer as well. Since, yeah, we are not out of time, so we can see the answers here. So at least some you would be able to pay for an online event as well. And this is maybe interesting, your interests. So EVs, electrical vehicles, is leading with regard to different vehicles and applications. Here is, yeah, you're interested in most things here presented. So just, I will close this down again so you can continue voting if you want to. Thank you all very much for today. We'll meet tomorrow, hopefully, and there will probably be new participants as well, and many interesting presentations tomorrow. And with that, I think, or we want to say something, Petra?
No, I was just going to wave a bit. So see you tomorrow, everybody.
See you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye. And thank you all for today.